You on Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. If you're in the YouTube break room, as you can see, and if you happen to listen to 107.5 The Fan throughout the last 24 hours, you were prepared for this. No Jake Query today. Instead, we go off the bench to one of our favorites. He's a Sportscaster of the Year award winner. He's a vice president over at ISC. You know him throughout as the voice of the Indy 11, and of course, a namestay around the high school sports ranks. Oh, and by the way, post-game show of the Indianapolis Colts. Do I have it all? Do I have the whole reel there, Mr. Greg Rachel?
My agent appreciates your assistance today.
He padded my pockets a little bit for that intro, so I'm glad he was able to help me out there, and I'm glad that we have you able to help us on a Colts Wednesday. Also rejoining the fray, fresh off a birthday, Eddie Garrison, CEO of the company,
Hello.
Back in the saddle. Eddie, how are you? How was the birthday?
Good. How are you?
Doing great.
It was
Doing
nice.
Great.
Had a nice day off yesterday and Monday. So I did not go to Michigan, by the way. Only people that are insane would drive up to Michigan.
Illinois was your place of choice then.
I'm not going to confirm or deny that statement.
That's fine. But birthday was good, though.
Yes.
All right,
yes.
good. Well, a happy, I took you yesterday, but a happy belated birthday from the audience as well. Greg, since we have you here, and I like to do this whenever we have somebody in studio with ties to the Colts, naturally on an NFL week, there would be heavy talk leading up to a Colts game, but especially want to lean on that with having you in the building, both looking back at Sunday's win over the Bears and looking ahead to what has all the makings of an ugly rock fight this weekend against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
As compared to the thing of beauty that last Sunday was.
Yes, exactly. We're going from one watercolor to another in terms of the painting atmosphere for both of these back-to-back games for the Colts. We had a conversation a little bit yesterday, and I also had this off-air with some of my friends who are diehard Colts fans about Anthony Richardson. And to be clear, I said this yesterday. I don't think you need to lessen the amount of carries that you're giving to Jonathan Taylor or the amount of rushes that they're having in total as a team. You had 33 carries a week ago, 23 of them from Jonathan Taylor. He was sensational. He reminded anybody that may have forgotten about it how talented he is, one of the most talented running backs in all the National Football League. For Anthony Richardson, it's 20 attempts, it's 10 completions, and the story of the day from the early sound bites is Shane Steichen alluding to the fact that that type of inaccuracy is not sustainable. It needs to improve, the growth needs to happen, and they believe it will. But in order to get that type of sustainability, how much of it is more consistency from him? In other words, 20 attempts is enough, but that number needs to be higher in terms of completions. He needs to settle in before you give him more of a workload in the passing game. Or is it the latter, which is not necessarily Caleb Williams attempting 52 passes a game, but more pass attempts to make up for lack of starts in his total body of work? How do you manage that?
Well, let's face it. Time and score usually dictates that. I guarantee you the Bears are not planning on Caleb Williams throwing the football 52 times in the game on Sunday because they were chasing the game and down 2 scores most of the way, and they could not generate anything in terms of the rushing game against a team that had been historically bad on run defense without their best defensive player, by the way, on Sunday afternoon, and that will be the case again against the Steelers for the Colts coming up. So I don't think any team, even a Mahomes or Josh Allen team, doesn't have it in the playbook that we're going to throw the ball 52 times in an NFL game. It just doesn't work that way. The way that I would phrase it is this. The Colts right now do not have the luxury of long-term planning with the exception of one position, and that's the quarterback, where they acknowledge, hey, we've got to we want these things to improve, and I don't think they have. I would say they've actually regressed from week 1 to week 2, and then week 3 was kind of similar to what we saw in week number 2. But in other words, at every other position, you are doing everything you can to win the football game. So in other words, that's my way of saying you don't have the luxury of worrying about the long-term ramifications for later this year for what 25 touches a game will do to Jonathan Taylor. You pound the rock with Jonathan Taylor, especially against one of the league's best defenses against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Given the turnover problems the Indianapolis Colts have had, I would like to channel an earlier era of Indiana University football. There may be chance of punt John punt coming up for the Colts on Sunday afternoon because 3 and out and kicking the football away and not handing it to T.J. Watt or one of his teammates at times might be the best possible thing for this football team. Because, again, the Steelers are no great shakes offensively, and they are going through some injury problems. And frankly, that does not have anything to do with whether it's Justin Fields or Russell Wilson or whatever the case is going to be at the quarterback position for the Steelers. So, in other words, to answer your question, JT left, JT right, like Chicago politics. Vote early, vote often. Give him the football as much as he can take it in week number 4.
Well, the Steelers, you mentioned the defensive prowess, and that's always been a backbone of Mike Tomlin, but it's been especially true through 3 games with their 3-0 start. It's not been offensive firepower. You outlined the struggles there as well, but just 26 points through 3 games, right around 8 points per game. That's lowest in the National Football League. Under 230 yards of total offense, 12 first downs a game, and they're limiting third down conversions, which has been a struggle area for the Colts this year, just 21% on the season. And that, again, even though 3-game sample size is what you're up against on Sunday, the balancing act issue that I have, and admittedly, I will concede as I'm in camp, I want to see more of Richardson in high volume. I will admit that against a Steelers defense, maybe that's not the best recipe. I don't even mean winning the game. I just mean for his overall confidence. TJ Watt is wrecking things for you. Maybe not the best idea.
High volume as a thrower, high volume as a runner.
High volume as a thrower.
Yeah.
I believe that the best way, go ahead.
I'm okay with slowly cranking the volume up as a runner as well. And whether that is decision-making from Anthony Richardson, whether that is play calling from Shane Steichen. Let's go back to the Green Bay game a couple of weeks ago. There was the one kind of design quarterback run and pull that there's a fumble, and seemingly the Colts didn't go. The Colts recovered the ball, but there was a fumble there, and seemingly the Colts didn't go back to that again against the Packers. Obviously, that was also a game where JT touched the ball 12 times and had over 100 yards rushing, and then was largely a spectator in the fourth quarter. It appears that lesson was learned from week 2 to week 3. And again, I understand you're exposing Anthony Richardson to more hits, and that was the big concern coming into the season was, okay, accuracy, well, we haven't answered that question. Availability, so far he has aced that test. He has taken every snap through 3 weeks. So I understand the risk and reward balance that is happening there. But I would love to see the Colts be a little more aggressive in terms of the rushing game and running the quarterback. Yes, against one of the better defenses in the league, but at the same time, it's a way to throw that defense off, and it's a way to make those third downs you just talked about be a lot more manageable. The last thing that I want to see is 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10 plus. Hand the ball off and get out and get to the next possession because, again, you mentioned rock fight. This is a race to 20. This is a race to 15. Jay Cook has his play at 2:40. I'll give you mine. What time is it? At 12:08.
Yes.
Under.
Yeah.
That's the play you should have for this week.
You mentioned turning up the volume on the running side of the ball, and we'll have plenty of time today for why I'd like to see them airing it out more with him just from a baptism by fire standpoint. But from the running element of it, do you feel at this stage it is them feeling out what he can handle? Is it them just being cautious overall with his health and that style? Or is it, to your point, whether it's play call or his choice, is it him forcing himself to not just be heavily reliant on his legs, or are we making one big sandwich with all 3 of them?
I was going to say, this is the part where the overlapping circles have all 3 of them. I think it's a little bit of all of those things. Again, do I think there could be some more called runs? Yes. Do I think, even without consciously thinking about it, because the discussion after last year has been, hey, you can't take that many hits. Hey, you can't take that many hits. So without making a conscious decision, it is, I'm going to make a play with my arm instead of making a play with my feet. No, it's okay. And obviously we had these conversations from the beginning of October until about the beginning of this season in terms of his availability. But I would always couch that with, but if you take away his ability to run the football, you frankly took away the reason why you drafted him where you did as the 3rd quarterback taken in last April's NFL draft. It's maybe this is not going to be a 15 to 20-year quarterback for this team. I know there are some of you that don't want him to be the quarterback for the next 15 to 20 minutes, given what you've seen the first 3 weeks. I'm not at that point. And more importantly, this team is not at that point. But I think, again, I use the phrase risk-reward. I think you have to live with that. It's why you invested in a guy like Joe Flacco, not to bench Anthony because he's been struggling, but in case he gets hurt, that way you have a reliable plan B to go to so your season does not entirely blow up. So I am of the opinion, I'm not saying he needs to run the ball 20 times like JT, and it's like a true wishbone set for the Indianapolis Colts, but I want to see them mix that in a little bit more because, again, I do think that will help the passing game. And the other stat that got better on Sunday, but still is nowhere near good enough, and a lot of people in the modern game will poo-poo this, and generally I would agree, but I think it's important for this team. That's time of possession, okay? Sunday was the best Colts day in terms of time of possession of the season, and the Bears still had the ball for 10 more minutes than the Indianapolis Colts did. And so
that goes back to sustainability on drives, right?
Exactly, which it's truly been feast or famine, big play or nothing. And so I'd like, again, for many reasons, again, I'm not saying 15, 20 carries, but getting him up around 10, I know it was 8 for 24 the way the game played out. Having a few more design quarterback runs, I'd be good with.
You mentioned the temptation that might arrive on the fan base with Joe Flacco being in the building. And from a Colts standpoint,
I've gotten a few of those phone calls.
Sure, I've had the text messages as well of people wondering, hey, when do you make the change? And I've been pretty adamant on it. I would think the Colts are internally as well. This has been a movie that's played out in this city just over the last 5 years enough where you have the Band-Aid that's supposed to solve all the issues at quarterback and the veteran's going to lead you to the promised land. I'm not a Colts fan. I want the city to do well, but it's well documented on the show where my fanhood lies in that regard. We don't need to go in depth on that. So I don't have a dog in the fight. But if I'm a Colts fan looking at what the last 5-7 years have been and what the next 5 could be, that picture does not involve 2024 Joe Flacco being a starter other than for injury.
Well, again, people have forgotten because it's been so long since we have gone through young developing quarterback play. I realize that, folks, you've seen bad quarterback play over the course of times of the last few years, whether it's 2021, a good chunk of 2022.
Most of the 20s really have been great.
Parts of 2017. You learn to appreciate 2020 a little bit more. The 1 year Phillip Rivers wasn't so bad. Now was it? But again, let's face it, okay? In my generation of being a Colts fan, and more importantly, being in town to cover moments like this, this is the third such iteration of here's the first round draft pick that we're handing the football to. And again, Peyton Manning, the Facebook algorithms are weird these days. There is this thing that has popped up on my feed called the Davenport Sports Network that shows like all of these 80s, 90s sports highlights, like they'll clip up stuff from like NFL primetime back in the day.
I feel like you'd love that.
Exactly. It's my wheelhouse. The reason I bring that up is that it showed the Sports Center or NFL primetime highlights of Peyton Manning's first NFL game against the Miami Dolphins.
Now they're just totally catering to you.
Where he threw 3 picks.
Yeah.
Okay. 28 picks his first year, 3 wins. Again, am I saying, is Anthony Richardson going to be Peyton Manning? No, there is a lot of ground to cover like that. But the franchise and the fan base kind of had to go through that. In 2012, we just hit fast forward on warp speed because Andrew Luck would make mistakes. He didn't throw 28 picks. He threw a lot more. He threw the home run ball that we've seen Richardson have. He had some issues on touch passes, but he frankly completed a lot more of them than we have seen from Anthony Richardson over the course of the first 3 games. In other words, I know this has not been the case the last 4 or 5 years, but over the last quarter century, we have been so ridiculously spoiled as to what we have seen as Colts fans, even with the blah of most of the last 3 to 4 to 5 years from a quarterback standpoint. But it's been a while since we've seen this. And again, the timeline got thrown off. If this had happened last year, virtually everybody would have said, all right, let's learn. But when you go from 4 wins to 9 wins, when you taste that unexpected success, now all of a sudden it has fast-forwarded everybody's timeline. And again, I have been as guilty of anybody in the offseason, in the preseason, of probably not giving the proper credit to, hey, this kid, as an Anthony Richardson, played about 3.25 or 3.5 games last year. In other words, he's going to go through this, and it's exactly what he's going through right now. Again, I want to see progression. I want to see it tomorrow, but you got to acknowledge this is the way that nearly every rookie quarterback plays in the National Football League.
The frustration is magnified for me because there aren't, save the tight end room, clear areas of this roster offensively where you can look around Anthony Richardson and say, man, he's got it rough.
Right.
Like a year ago, we could have the conversation about the wide receiver room.
It has gotten
now.
better the last 2 years, yes.
You have an all-pro running back in Jonathan Taylor in the backfield. You have an offensive line that on its worst day is still pretty serviceable, and on its best day feels like there's going to be enough protection for him to be able to do what he wants. The tight end room, again, kind of a mixed bag. I think that's where some of the frustration lies with Colts fans, because you look at, I'll use Trevor Lawrence because he's still, by all accounts, figuring things out in Jacksonville.
Right.
I'll use Caleb Williams because he's a defined rookie. Both of those two, there are clear issues, especially up front on their offensive line, where you say, well, yeah, they're running for their life every play. Of course they're going to make high-octane mistakes.
Correct.
That's less prevalent with the Colts,
right?
Because it feels like they have things figured out offensively.
And that's a fair point.
And so, like, I looked at power rankings like I like to do every now and again. Mm-hmm. ESPN had this yesterday. They'll list the biggest flaws in each team. And the one for the Colts is inaccurate quarterback play because, of course, it is.
Right. Absolutely it is. And so it's the media thing that I'm doing that's talking out of both sides of your mouth. But I think you have to acknowledge the duality of the situation, okay? Yes, Anthony Richardson has to play. Yes, he's got to go through this, baptism by fire. Because you had no choice, you sat him last year. He's already had the clipboard experience that you didn't want to have for the last 13 weeks, basically, of last season.
Do you think that's a real consideration to do that again?
No.
If things get bad enough?
No.
I don't think so either. I just want to, on the record, make sure I'm not crazy for thinking that.
It would have to be cataclysmically bad for that to be the case, all right? But at the same time, it's okay to look at Anthony and say, buddy, nobody else is missing players like this in the National Football League. Nobody is. This is Nuke Lelouch. He's hit the bull on like 4 or 5 throws, okay? And so you can't not read defenses. You can't not do full scouts, but there has to be almost equal time given in practice to, hey, buddy, let's work on footwork. Let's work on throwing motions. And then we have now seen a pattern of, hey, these throws have worked well. These throws haven't. So again, if you're Shane Steichen, you have to cater the game plan to doing what he does well right now, and then trying to add to that week by week. Again, the overarching phrase that I will give everything is the Indianapolis Colts right now do not have the luxury of long-term planning. Every coach speak, every player that's been trained as to how to say to the media will say something like 1 week at a time. We got to go 1-0. It's 17 one-game seasons.
100% better.
I am not so sure if it has ever been more accurate than right now that for this team. You and I have the luxury of looking at scheduling. Going, that should be one, that should be a loss. But to be honest with you,
you can't do that anymore this year, by the way.
I don't know, because I'm not sure what I'm going to see from this football team.
Denver blew out Tampa Bay last week. Carolina's all of a sudden, you can't do that now.
The league is like that, but this team is very much the smack dab in the middle of that representation. And so it is truly a week-to-week league and team, this Indianapolis Colts football team.
We've yet to bring up the defense, and it was massive yet again against the Bears over the weekend. Tae-Kwon Lewis, defensive end for the Colts, going to join us here in about 27 minutes or so. We will look at that Colts defense in a moment we return. Plus, still to come, we'll have a conversation with Zack Keefer. He had a fantastic piece up on The Athletic, getting to do something that, quite frankly, I would like to do if I had the resources Zack did, which is go behind the scenes, get a little taste of the Manning cast.
Now, Zach's kids and my son go to the same elementary school, so this may also be a PTA meeting that we have when he joins the show during the 1 o'clock hour as well. There may be some airing of the grievances, just as a heads up.
Do we need to have billables set up for the two of you there?
We're
no,
good.
Okay.
No, we're both very happy with the school that our children attend.
Well, when we return, we will take a look at one change that might need to happen around a major sports league in this city and how it impacts one of our favorite stars. Greg and I talked about it a little bit before the show. Perhaps patience is the best word in mind there. It's kind of a common theme on the show today. It's Query and Company on The Fan. Most of that first segment dedicated to the Colts from an offensive standpoint. Eddie Garrison, a little bit of breaking news in the awards department for the Colts, though, on the defensive side, was there not?
That is right, Jimmy. Not only breaking news for the Colts, but some IndyCar breaking news as well.
Ooh.
As it pertains to the Indianapolis Colts, Jalen Jones named your AFC Defensive Player of the Week. And when it comes to IndyCar, Ed Carpenter Racing announces its driver lineup for the 25 season, and that will be Alexander Rossi joining the team on a multi-year deal, and he will be driving the number 20 car, and Christian Rasmussen will drive full-time for Ed Carpenter Racing in the number 21 car.
My follow-up question would be, how many races is Ed Carpenter going to drive himself? Is it just the 500, or are his days of being an IndyCar driver now at an end?
We had him on after the announcement that he wasn't racing anymore this past season, and he neglected to comment. He said he didn't know that he needed to evaluate, so it'll be interesting to see.
Look, it's tough, and I love Ed, to be clear. Anytime you have a homegrown story, you're always going to have gravitas to go support that, but I never can read his tone, so I couldn't tell from that interview if it was one of somber reality that maybe the days are really numbered, or if there's still dedication to want to get back out there and be a part of, at the very least, the 500.
This is my speculation. This is not inside information. This is just me trying to make 2 + 2 = 4. My best guess would be is that he would drive a car in this year's 500, and that might be it for him.
Yeah.
Again, just a guess on my part.
I mean, I feel like if you're going to have a local Hoosier, that the aspect of hanging it up would need to be done during the greatest spectacle in racing. I agree with that logic.
And frankly, the bigger news that leads the Alexander Rossi news for Ed Carpenter Racing was the funding source that was announced yesterday in terms of the Splenda/Java House money now being a part of Ed Carpenter Racing, which is why, frankly, a guy like Alexander Rossi becomes available for them to be their lead driver going forward.
The initial breaking news out of the gate, though, there from Eddie Garrison and a couple different people on the beat, Nate Atkins, Joel Erickson, had this. Jalen Jones, AFC Defensive Player of the Week. Not a big surprise there, given the performance that he had against Chicago. 2 interceptions throughout, a couple of nice tackles, big plays as well in that contest win against the Bears. My biggest issue for the Colts going into this season defensively, and I wasn't alone in this, was the untested nature of the secondary.
Sure.
And Chris Ballard got on podiums and, smashed tables, basically proclaiming that this is just a young group. We believe in them, and they're going to grow, and they're going to develop to a point where we're not going to be having this conversation in a season's time, because that's the level of faith that he has in them. I don't want to undercut anything the Colts just did defensively, but I gave this caveat on Twitter after Sunday's win. It's hard for me to have a full boost of newfound confidence in this group when I realize what the Bears are offensively.
This is where we can actually look at the schedule and offer some level of predictive thought, okay? I wouldn't say that the secondary was bad against the Texans in week number 1. I tended to give a lot of credit for those plays that were made on 3rd down and long, because C.J. Stroud is pretty good, not because the defense was bad. Could they have been better? Of course. They were terrible against the run in week number 1. But the secondary, I thought, was okay. You really couldn't judge them against the Packers because Malik Willis threw the ball 14 times and literally threw the ball downfield like more than 10 yards one time out of those 14.
And the running game still, Josh Jacobs was all over the place from that standpoint.
That's the thing where you can pass judgment, knowing what's coming and still not be able to stop it, at least in half number 1. Again, the Bears, the Steelers, same on offense. The Jaguars, who knows what they are. Will Levis, more mayonnaise, please. The Dolphins are next. Who's their quarterback? They're on quarterback number 3.
That's a funny conversation in Miami. I know we won't waste too much time here locally talking about it, but everybody wants to point fingers at Tua and his struggles and how anybody could go in that system and do what he does, and then you have Skylar Thompson go in there trying to do it, and it doesn't work out the same way.
Now, once you get to the Texans at the end of October, now we're having a different conversation.
Yeah.
Because it's C.J. Stroud. Darnold has looked really good in Minnesota and has a player like Justin Jefferson. Josh Allen has been on fire. Aaron Rodgers is next. Jared Goff then for the Lions. So business will pick up at some point in time. And maybe, just maybe, it allows a young secondary to grow. So the results from the secondary so far may be better than expected, especially on having a Juju Brents. But Nick Cross has looked the part. Julian Blackmon's injury costed him a week. But we also have to acknowledge the injuries that we saw almost on 3 successive plays in the game this past week, where Kenny Moore got banged up, where Kwity Paye got banged up, where Dallas Flowers got banged up. So what exactly are the defensive pieces going to look like this week? Time will tell. Friday's press conference with Coach Tyquan, where it's thumbs up, thumbs down. This guy's playing, this guy is not. I'm sure some of those details probably were shared at his get-together during the 11 o'clock hour in terms of guys that aren't practicing today and things like that. So secondary has played better than expected. I just worry about them having enough healthy bodies, even against a very average Steelers offense coming up on Sunday afternoon.
Eddie, a couple things I wanted to throw to you, first of which was Kenny Moore and Kwity Paye were announced as not practicing today from Steichen, that Greg alluded to there, correct?
Yep, won't practice, but Steichen said progressing well. We'll see.
And that goes back to, again, what Greg mentioned, that likely Friday's practice report and Friday's press conference, you get more clarity on what exactly this defense is going to look like. Additionally, though, in shifting gears towards the Steelers for a second here, because it hasn't been all muck offensively, Justin Fields has actually looked the part to some extent. I mean, I'm not saying
he's been solid,
franchise quarterback, but yeah,
and solid is good enough.
He's been a Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback.
There you go. Yes, to a T. He fits that exact brand that you would want in Pittsburgh. You had mentioned off air, Eddie, and just to clarify this now on air, do we have updates on the running back room yet in Pittsburgh in terms of what to expect, whether it's Jalen Warren, Najee Harris, or if either of them might be at risk of missing time?
So it sounds like Jalen Warren, who's the primary third down, like the Austin Eckler type running back in Pittsburgh, is not going to play. He's dealing with a knee injury. And then Najee Harris left the game on Sunday in a sling. Now it's like an elbow sprain, I think is what it's labeled as right now, or a shoulder sprain. I can't remember which one it was, but his likelihood seems probable in terms of playing on Sunday. Now the third back would be Cordero Patterson, who was with Arthur Smith in Atlanta, and now he's traveled with Arthur Smith to Pittsburgh. On the defensive side, Alex Highsmith is a big loss for them, and it sounds like he will not suit up on Sunday, and so that allows the Colts now to put all of their undivided attention on T.J. Watt and Cameron Hayward.
Rick, I realize that this is the reality for all of us, and you're playing the role of elder statesman today, so I'm not trying to act like that just because I'm knocking on the door of 30.
But still younger than the guy that normally sits in this chair.
Yeah, I don't want to make you feel
by
older
about
than you are.
4 years, just to point it out.
And I appreciate that for the record. I'm not trying to add years to the Greg Rakestraw bingo card, but Cordell Patterson is a name for me, and I get it. This is just a part of getting older, but I feel like he's been in the league for about 35 years, and it's really just a decade, but he's 33 years old. I saw what was there in Atlanta. If it's Cordell Patterson in the backfield instead of Najee Harris, my fear of what could happen to the Colts in the trenches changes dramatically.
I have a fear of him making big plays out of the backfield in terms of the passing game.
Yeah.
The kickoff needs to not be dynamic. Just hammer that to the back of the end zone so he can't return it. And don't worry, what made me feel old was not your knowledge or lack thereof of his actual age or length of time in the league. You know how the Colts on game days do the music and try to have guys identify it?
Yeah.
For the love of God, it was Biggie and Hypnotize.
Oh,
And
yes.
some of the guys were like I think it was Juju Mertz said, my dad's going to kill me about this one. Like
Oh,
watching
man.
some of them struggle, I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? And then it hits me. Yeah, that song's 27 years old. Yeah.
But
Which is still younger than Cordero Patterson, by the way.
still younger than Patterson, and as you mentioned, still 4 years younger than the regular namesake, Jake Query, who will be back in here tomorrow. We will take a break. When we come back, a conversation with Colts defensive end Tae-Kwon Lewis. He was massive in a goal line stand that proved pivotal as the contest rolled on in the win against the Bears. We'll get his thoughts on what he saw down in the red zone and also a look ahead to the matchup against Justin Field and the Steelers. It's Query & Company. Greg Rakestraw to my right. I'm Jimmy Cook here on The Fan. Just a few moments from now, we'll be talking with Colts veteran defensive end Tae-Kwon Lewis. Jimmy Cook alongside Greg Rakestraw. It is Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Eddie Garrison with us as well, manning behind the ones and twos. One of the first things I'm looking forward to talking with Tae-Kwon about, Greg, is the goal line stand they wind up having in that first half, defending what would have been a response drive from Chicago after Indianapolis goes down and scores. And we'd laugh at the speed option the Bears chose to go with on 4th and goal for a lot of different reasons, but give credit to the Colts. As odd as the play call was, you have them swarming to the ball carrier, Tae-Kwon Lewis leading that charge, and they're able to defend stand and have a big momentum swing in a game that, when you're in rock fight territory, ugly games where it's going to come down to every one of those possessions, it turned pivotal even if it was a first half play.
Have you seen the picture that's kind of circulating on social media where there's like 4 Bears offensive linemen down on the ground and 5 Colts chasing the lone Bears running back on the play? Yeah, Colts fans kind of went through that decision-making process about said speed option play a week ago, and literally the conversation was, Bears didn't watch that game film? Apparently not.
Well, he joins us now, the aforementioned Tae-Kwon Lewis, Colts veteran defensive end. Tae-Kwon, happy Wednesday to you, and thank you on the front end for making time for us. We were just discussing as we came back from break the goal line stand that you guys have in that first half. I know you talked about it after the game, but especially on 3rd and 4th down, what did you see, and were you as surprised as everybody else with how many white jerseys were wrapped around Caleb Williams on the 4th and goal, and how many Bears jerseys were just in the turf?
I mean, it was shocking to see. When they broke the huddle, and you just see the look in everybody's eyes. You're like, all right, we got a yard to go. We got to defend this blade of grass, and the play that as the play went on, and you see how it's playing out. You see his option, and you just get a feel for you, like, all right, we got to, feather this out, slow play it, and expect the pitch so we get a time for the defense to come over top, make the play. And, I mean, the guys are just rallying, and then it looked like everybody was in sync as far as, their O-line just falling. It was kind of crazy.
Tyquan, one of the things that I think has not been discussed enough in terms of looking in the rearview mirror on Sunday, not just how well you guys did against the run and how you played defensively, but the fact you did it without DeForest Buckner, who basically has missed one game in 4 1/4 years of being with this football team. So how did you and the other guys, not just on defense, but in the defensive line room, how'd you do it without DeForest?
Yeah, I mean, we all rally together. We're a close-knitted group. Next man up mentality, I think that applies everywhere across the league. But, we have a special group. We all, have, just a responsibility that we like to uphold as far as each other. We try to play without any drop-offs. We know that DeForest, he's a big part of what we do, especially, in the pass rush department, and as far as run. I mean, that's a big body inside, and, you put in other people, and you expect them to just go be the best them. So, we got Tommy Wattaven, Grove plays some 3, whatever's necessary. We know that we got guys that's going to step up.
Those first 2 weeks of the season, there's stellar performances on the other side of the ball from Joe Mixon, and you're looking at where things go with Josh Jacobs the following week, and knowing you have a Chicago team that, while DeAndre Swift is in the middle road of his career, there's still weapons there in the running game. Take us through the last 2 weeks of prep defensively to try to clean some of that up. And as Rake mentioned, when you lose a body like DeForest Buckner, you would think further regression would happen. That doesn't happen for you guys. You turn in your best rush defense performance of the season.
Right. I mean, it was. I'm not gonna say it was rush thing or anything like that for everyone on the outside. I'm from the outside looking in, but when you are part of a locker room, we recognize the things that we have to clean up. We watch the tape. We do all the necessary things to correct what we need to correct. And, moving forward, we knew that, we weren't going to tolerate that anymore. We had to fix the things that we needed to fix. And, even without DeForest, like I said, we got guys that still stepped up and that were still willing to, be in his place and, willing to, like, do the dirty work, just getting stops in the run, Credit to them. I mean, they still were playing physical as well as any other group that we face. It's just this. We just had the mindset that we had to go out and dominate.
In year number 7, you've been through this before. You've been the guy that's had to sit in the sidelines. Other guys have tried to fill your void. Now it may happen again. You won't have DeForest this week. It's still kind of up in the air on Kwity Paye with him not practicing. If Kwity can't go this week, what does that mean for you and the other guys at the DN position?
Oh, man, we just rally behind one another, You still got Dio, you have Latu, you got Isaiah Land, we got guys in the room, that's going to step up, and, we all going to rally. We're a band of brothers, and we all know that we all have a job to do, especially, like, stopping the run. That always comes first. And, we're going to do that. We're going to set firm edges. We're going to penetrate, and we're going to be dominant in the run. That's always the goal.
Well, since you mentioned Latu, his first kind of big impact play as a Colt obviously came late in that game. Just your thoughts about kind of where he is 3 games into his NFL career.
Oh, man. I mean, he's a polished pass rusher, he's a kid that's anxious to work, each and every day. He shows up to work with the mindset of getting better. And, I mean, credit to him and his, his past coaches or whoever he's worked with, they did a fantastic job with him as far as his out-of-hand coordination, understanding levels and the rush. I mean, he's a wonderful kid. He's a pro already. You don't have to, like, really question things he do. Now it's just necessarily time on the grass as far as, like, professional speed of the game. That's the only difference.
Colts defensive end Tae-Kwon Lewis is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, and he's presented by Shelby Materials, the concrete and aggregate experts. The main story offensively for this team going forward, Tyquan, has been Anthony Richardson and him trying to improve his accuracy and get better game by game. I know Shane Steichen had mentioned to the media that this is something clearly that's being worked on a daily basis. Richardson's working at every opportunity with quarterbacks coach Cam Turner. From your side of the ball, defensively in practice, in what ways are you testing Anthony Richardson, trying to help him get better in these sessions off of a game day?
I don't really dive too deep into that. I mean, I know that we have a good coaching staff around Anthony, and I know that with Shane and all the guys in the offensive room, they are developing him to be, a great quarterback. That's a plan. You got a young guy, missed time last year. I know all about missing time on the grass. Then you have him come into a role as biggest quarterback, and the things that he probably didn't get to see last year, he's seeing now. And I know that they're preparing him for it. We're preparing him for it. So, like, he may get, like, a few unscouted looks in practice with the scout team, or, like, 7-on when it's good on good, or a compete period. So it's, like, that's how we, like, develop him to be better, It's just all competitive reps of, like, full speed at the end of practice, or, just doing things to, like, help him, like, see it better, Like I said, he's a great talent, and, we're going to rally behind him.
Well, seemingly every player that's been asked, offense, defense, special teams, has universally said, hey, we got his back. And part of it is you're supposed to. That's the way a team works. But in terms of what you see from him as a player, as a person, as a leader, why is that answer kind of seemingly so universally said by every guy in that locker room?
I mean, you could just see it every single day. You could just see the talent. You could see the will to want to, he wants to win, and I mean, that's the main thing. Like, when you stepping out on the field, you want to be around someone that has that will to win, and they want to prepare to win just as well, and that's what we see out of him. So, I mean, that's why we rally behind him so much.
What challenges or what obstacles will you face on Sunday going up against a quarterback that is had a similar road to other young quarterbacks in this league in Justin Fields, where it's bounced around, trying to find his footing, and now appears to have found, even with Russell Wilson potentially breathing down his neck, he's appeared to have found some stability in Pittsburgh. How will you guys be test offensively against Mike Tomlin and company?
You said offensively?
Yeah. From your group defensively, how will you be tested by the Steelers' offense? Poor phrasing on my part.
Oh, you're all right. But I mean, it's Justin Fields. I've seen Justin ever since he was at Ohio State. This guy, he's a strong runner. He's gonna challenge the edges of the defense. And he could go north and south. He's a amazing player, athlete, I should say. And now he's throwing it better. He's throwing the ball even better. But you can clearly tell by the tempo of their offense. They want to control the pace of the game. They want to get the runs that they need. They want to get the passes, play action and stuff like that. Get them on the move. You can just tell. But I mean, we have to be coordinated in our rushes. We have to have Plaster on the back end when he does. Break contain throughout the pocket. But I think we're prepared for that. We train for things like this.
Final thing before we let you go, there are a whole lot of Bears fans at that game on Sunday.
Oh, man,
there's going to be a lot of Steelers fans there, but you're also now to the point now where you're seeing there was a lot of Colts blue in Lambeau. So as a player, are you so locked in that you don't notice it? Does it bother you? How do you handle that when you see almost a 50-50 split of fans on Sunday afternoon?
For home games, I would love to be more blue than anything. I think that it plays a huge difference in the game. When we have more fans, but I can't say I'm gonna be all upset because you gotta realize that there's a lot of people in this world and they're gonna travel for their team, especially if it's close. But I would prefer that it be our team, especially with us being a home team, or even when we're on the road. I would still prefer that we have a strong showing from our fans, and I think our fans have been doing a tremendous job this year. It's been the loudest I've seen Lucas Oil since I've been here, and I'm forever grateful for that.
Going to be another electric atmosphere this Sunday at Lucas Oil Stadium. Hopefully the Colts are able to box out those terrible towels as much as possible.
Oh, yeah.
Taekwon, appreciate the time. Best of luck the rest of the way, and hope to talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks, Taekwon.
That's Taekwon Lewis, Colts defensive end, joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, and he was presented by Shelley Materials, the concrete and aggregate experts. When we come back, we'll take a look behind the scenes at one of the most intricate operations in NFL on the media side of things. Zack Keefer has a great story in The Athletic covering just that. We'll have all of it when we return on Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Colts defensive end Tae-Kwon Lewis. That conversation will be up in just a little bit on the Podcast Center on 1075thefan.com, or just search Query and Company wherever you get your podcast. Greg Rakestraw to my right. I'm Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison with us as well. It is the aforementioned Query and Company. One of my favorite aspects of Monday Night Football over the last couple of years, and from a rating standpoint, perhaps I'm in the minority of that the last couple of seasons, but is diving in to the Manning cast and being able to hear plays broken down, live reactions from two of the most talented, most iconic moment-setting quarterbacks of the last 15, 20 years in Peyton and Eli Manning. To take that a step further in terms of that fandom and getting to enjoy that will be to be on scene and experience it live in real time, and that's what our next guest was able to do. Zack Keefer joins us, national features writer for The Athletic. Zack, this is a fascinating project in and of itself. I understand that's kind of the job title of being a features writer, to be able to come up with new angles and take us places that we wouldn't already be able to go. When you sat down with Peyton, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this was a split assignment article where you and another correspondent were, one was with Peyton, you yourself were with Peyton, one was with Eli, but getting that behind the scenes look of the Manning cast, learning how the operation goes, how the sausage is made, as it were. What was that like, and what maybe did you learn about Peyton and Eli and that makeup that you didn't already know?
Yeah, I mean, how much time do you have to go on for hours? I'll say this: I was exhausted walking out of there. It was unbelievable. I mean, you've always kind of, for people who listen to your guys' show, like, what's it like to watch football with Peyton Manning? I think we've all kind of wondered that. And I was talking to him this summer about something else, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to shoot my shot. I was like, Peyton, would you ever let me just be a fly on the wall while you shoot the Manning cast? And luckily, my friend and my colleague Dan Duggan, who covers the Giants, knew Eli a little bit. And he was like, I want to do it from New Jersey. And so they said, sure. And I was stunned at first, but I was like, heck yes, let's do this. And it's bizarre. I mean, you drive to this really, really unsuspicious garage outside of Denver where he shoots it, and you walk in and there's like 20 muscle cars, right? And you're like, where am I right now? And then Peyton walks in and everybody sort of locks in, and it was as close to being his teammate I'll ever get, because it felt like I was in the huddle with him. And I know we're not actually playing a football game, but this dude is absolutely locked in, and he's not acting. Like, he's not putting on a performance. Like, he's absolutely in love with the sport of football. And he doesn't even watch the game at 90% or 95%. Like, he's all in. We're walking out after this game, and luckily we got a great game between the Eagles and the Falcons, a great finish. And we're walking out together, and Peyton's red in the face, and he's sweating a little bit. And I'm like, you didn't even play this game, and he sounds and looks like he just led this game-winning drive, not Kirk Cousins. So I tried to capture that in the story. Like, this guy's intense, and Eli's chill. Even the way Peyton eats his enchiladas at halftime in about 5 minutes was intense. So it did not feel like a night of work. It was a blast.
It's going back to the story, and I wondered if this was the case at one point in time. The conversation of actually having a host for this, Kyle Brandt as kind of the host, and I love the reveal of, he's like, hey, don't hire me for this. They don't need me. Make this Peyton and Eli. That's almost kind of like what I think of the broadcast. I'm almost like, hey, I know you have like 2 or 3 guests, and Belichick is now part of it, and because of the unique relationship he's got with both, I think that works. But when they have guests on that broadcast, Zach, I'm almost kind of like, why are you bothering? I want to hear Peyton and Eli. Those are the two people's opinion that I want to hear. I want to hear these two great quarterbacks, these two brothers, go at it with their experienced set of eyes and ears, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm with you, Greg, and I've watched it a lot over the years, and I think Belichick is fantastic. I think he adds another layer to it, and he was great on Monday night. But even Peyton and I talked about this, and he knows. Like, sometimes they just have a guest, and it just doesn't quite work, especially the celebrity guest. They try to get a fan of the team, but like in week 1, Jets-Niners, it wasn't a good game, and Adam Sandler was on, and it just didn't really help. And like you said, I think those of us who love football, I just want to hear Eli and Peyton talk about football. Like, that's why I'm tuning in. But sometimes it can be really fun. Snoop Dogg was on. I thought Matt Ryan was excellent at the end of this game. You've got 3 quarterbacks, 2 of which have won a Super Bowl, another who came really, really close. And they're breaking down the 2-minute drill as Kirk Cousins leads the Falcons down the field. That's what I want to watch. That's what I want to hear. I thought that was excellent. They're trying to figure that out, but Peyton does understand that. I was talking about, I was like, my wife really likes the Manning cast because it's different and because it doesn't have the game play-by-play feel. I think he likes to be locked into the play-by-play, but they're sort of figuring that out. And with reference to Kyle Brandt, like, Kyle was really honest. He was like, dude, I thought this is going to change my career, like getting to host a show with the Mannings. He prepped. He thought he nailed it. But halfway through, he was like, they don't need me. And he gave that great quote, like, as soon as he stopped talking, Peyton was like Mozart picking up the baton. And he said he called Jamie Horowitz, who basically runs the show, and he was like, this kills me, but you can't hire me. You can't hire anyone because all this is going to do is just get in the way. People want to hear Peyton and Eli. They don't want to hear anybody else.
To that end, and I'm glad that you're able to confirm that the reactions are true and genuine, because you see Peyton get riled up on any offensive penalty mistake or anything like that. He can't help himself if there's a special teams mishap or, God forbid, an extra point or a field goal goes wide. During breaks, I know you have quotes on this, so I don't want to give too much of the goods away. If you're not subscribed to The Athletic, what are you doing? But you can get Zach's work as well as one of our fellow members of the fan community in James Boyd over there too. But he highlights Jalen Hurts in that Falcons-Eagles game getting a penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct for spiking the ball, and Peyton kind of loses his mind over it. In that moment, when the commercial break happens or when you're just talking to him for quotes for this story, it is as genuine as he would be playing on the field, is it not?
Yeah, I don't think he can turn that off. and what's interesting, and there's some parallels here, like every time I write a story and use a Peyton quote where we've talked in the weeks or months before, guys, I get an email at like 7 a.m. the next day that's like, good story, or like he doesn't turn it down and he doesn't turn it off. And I think that's what makes him Peyton freaking Manning. And everybody in this town who watched him quarterback all those years, that's the personality trait that you love, and that's why this team won so many games and why he was so good. He's as alpha as they come, and he doesn't turn it off in the commercial breaks. I'm watching him, and he's barking at his producer, telling him to get the all 22 replay on the screen. He's dissecting plays with Belichick, and that's a part of the story. And I'm sitting there in this garage in Denver, and I'm watching two of the best football minds of all time, dissect a play. And it's just unbelievable. It's like dying and going to football heaven. And they're just as heated, you would think, as they are in a Wednesday meeting room when Peyton was playing and Belichick was coaching. I mean, these guys, this is what they are. And just because they're on the other side of it in the media, they're still just dissecting football as real as they did. And there's a good story about them back when Peyton was playing and Belichick was coaching at the Pro Bowl, sort of having this long session at a bar, moving beer bottles and salt and pepper shakers around the table like they were receivers. Like, these guys went back and forth in a lot of different ways. And so it's cool to see that manifest itself on the show. And no, I mean, Peyton, he didn't sugarcoat it. Like, he hated that penalty on Jalen Hurts for spiking the ball after that long run. He hates that kind of stuff. And I love the Barry Sanders quote, right? So they score a touchdown, or no, instead of just celebrating the play, he spikes the ball, gets the penalty, and he says, Barry Sanders, right? That's what Barry Sanders always did after touchdowns. He just handed the ball off, and it made me think of another player. It made me think of Marvin Harrison,
right,
who barely ever celebrated as well. I mean, you could have gone with Marvin,
right,
but he didn't. But it was so fun, and honestly, I was exhausted at the end just trying to keep up with this guy.
Clearly, we have spent too much time. The synapses in my head were saying, why did they say Marvin? The exact thought that I had on that as well. Zack Keefer, The Athletic, again, joining us. Greg Rakestraw for Jake Query, alongside of Jimmy Cook and Eddie Garrison, 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. What's next for Peyton? And let me then explain why I asked that question. Clearly, he and Eli can do this for some time. Omaha Productions is going very well. He is still a very active pitchman. He can basically just be Peyton Manning for the rest of his life, and he's going to be just fine. He can go in seclusion for the rest of his life, and financially, he is going to be just fine. What do you think the next challenge is for Peyton Manning?
Yeah, that's a good question, Greg, and I wanted to get into that with him, and of course I picked the best spot in the world to do it while he's slamming 2 enchiladas in 5
right,
minutes during
right.
halftime, and he's barely able to chew. So that's on me. But I asked him, like, why didn't you ever want to run a team? Why didn't you ever want to coach? And can you imagine being the quarterback playing for Peyton Manning's team? Like,
good
my
luck
God,
with that, yeah.
prayers to that man. And he was really honest about it. I mean, we know that Jim Irsay chased him really hard in the winter of 2017. He just fired Ryan Grigson as general manager, and Irsay chased Manning hard and basically said, you can have any job you want. And I get it. Everybody in this town gets it. And Peyton basically said, like, if I do that, that's my whole existence. Like, that is everything. I would approach it the same way as when I was starting quarterback. And I think he likes the freedom. I think he likes the freedom of being able to coach his son on the football field in the fall, go to his daughter's volleyball games. And he knows no other way. He wouldn't be able to do it at 50, 60, 70%. He would do it 110%. And he likes the freedom, like you said, of being Peyton Manning. He likes to go to Tennessee and teach his class and go to Volunteers games, and he likes to do his ads, and he loves the Manning cast. The reason he's not on the road every week calling games like Tom Brady is for an absurd amount of money is because he doesn't want to travel, and he just wants to be at home. And so he gets to do this job 10 minutes from his house in Denver and hang out with his brother a little bit and do it in a different way. And they're really changing how we watch NFL broadcasts, at least on Monday night. And then the funniest thing is, and I don't agree with them at all on this, at all, I said, why didn't you want to coach? Like, you could just walk into any football team in the world right now and get a quarterback job at the very least, if not OC. And he says, I don't think I'd be any good at it. He says, whenever I was calling plays when my backup was in there, we'd go 3 and out, punt. And, okay, Peyton, that's because that guy was on the field. He probably wasn't any good because he was a backup. And the Colts always had, pretty mediocre backups. But I don't know. I think he – I think he'd be too hard on himself and too hard on the quarterback, so it's probably a good thing he didn't go into coaching. But it was fascinating to hear his perspective on that.
There were reports, and I kind of mentioned this at the top, of where the ratings and staying power would be for the Manning cast. And some of the week one struggles, admittedly, we didn't mention this at the beginning, have since been attributed to the DirecTV, ESPN holdout, and it being simulcast on an ABC. The game that you specifically covered with the Falcons and the Eagles, nice bounce back number. I think over 1 million viewers concurrently watching that broadcast and kind of back to normal levels for them. Greg asked, what's next for Manning? What's next for the Manning cast itself? Do you envision they continue to try to fine-tune the guest selections they make? I know you brought up the infamous Arnold Schwarzenegger bringing his donkey and feeding him during the Manning cast, and
right.
Viewers not really liking that versus them having some great conversations, whether it's Snoop Dogg or Miles Teller, the game that you did. Where is the fine-tuning for the Manning cast to make sure that as long as they want to do it, it stays in a viewership retention mindset for Monday Night Football?
I can tell you this, it's not going anywhere. They signed a 9-year deal with ESPN. So basically, Omaha produces the entire show, and ESPN just pays them for it. So they just signed a 9-year deal through 2034, which is a long time. Now, they only do 10 games a year, roughly. Still waiting for that first Manning cast on a Colts game, but then again, the Colts have to be good enough to play on Monday Night Football for that to happen. It's not going anywhere. It is a very elaborate production. So there's a lot of thought that goes into this. It is not something they just show up and do every Monday night. I think it scratches their football itch to a degree, and it gives them a lot of freedom, Peyton and Eli, to sort of do it their way. Look, they know the guests are hotly debated, right? Peyton knows every little inch of the operation when it comes to the Manning cast, and he knows some are not as great as others. They're trying to figure that out.
Do the rating battles fuel him, Zach? I mean, as a competitor, is he aware of that? Does he approach that the same way that he would have his playing days, wanting it to be as compelling, as user and viewer driven as possible?
I don't think he is, and I think here's why. I don't think he's driven by the ratings because that's not the ultimate barometer of success for them, right? So they want to be an alternate broadcast. So they want to give something to the viewer that the main broadcast isn't. So ESPN wants both to win, right? They want the Aikman-Buck broadcast to win. They want the Manning cast to win. But really, they just want to reach as many viewers as they can. And the reality is a lot of the Manning cast is tied to the game. Like the first game was a dud. I mean, I was bored in the third quarter because the Niners were whooping them. The second game was excellent, and the number was almost twice what it was in week one. It was like almost 1.4 million viewers. So I think the game matters a lot, and I think the fact that they don't do it every week matters as well. But I don't think that the numbers really drive Peyton. He didn't bring that up, and the fact that they're signed for 9 more years means ESPN likes what they're doing. They like the format, and they're going to keep doing it. And I don't think they're a results-driven show as much as some of the other broadcasts are.
Again, Zack Keefer, The Athletic, our guest, joining us on the Express Pro Tire audio guest line. Again, it's Query and Company. Greg Rakestraw in for Jake here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. So what's the next big project you're working on? You complete this great story. Now it's on to the next one. What's the next thing you're working on?
Yeah, working on a couple right now. I honestly, Greg, I'm just coming up for air. I kind of hopped on the road for training camp in early August, and I haven't really stopped since. Had a big Troy Aikman story, wrote about C.J. Stroud. I've been keeping, tabs on the Colts and seeing where Anthony Richardson is at. And then the Manning story was really my last 7 days. So it's going to be a little while before another one comes out. I need to catch my breath, but we've got some good ones in the works. Just stay tuned.
A, I'm happy you have a life, and B, that means you can actually work on the parent volunteer committee at our school the way you're supposed to, since my son and Zach's kids.
I need to get in there on Fridays and read to the little one.
It is a Montessori, so we're supposed to contribute, Zach. We'll try to schedule that together so we can go enjoy and relive our days of covering the Colts for so many years. I saw you, obviously, at the Colts season opener, and it's easier to keep tabs on the team that literally is in your own backyard. So your thoughts on kind of where the Colts are at 1 and 2 and as the Anthony Richardson turns through the first 3 weeks of the season?
Yeah, I've watched him closely, and I'm not there every day, and that matters, right? I'm not in the locker room as much as I used to, talking to the players. Pretty disappointed with the way the team has looked, especially the defense. Now, they played better on Sunday. I don't know where you guys fall on this, but I'm anxious for your thoughts and the listeners as well. Richardson's been bad. I think everyone agrees with that. His decision-making's been bad. But I feel like some of his misses, and there have been a lot, I feel like it's correctable. I feel like he wasn't missing these throws last year, and these are things you can fix in practice and on the practice field and with mechanics. And maybe I'm looking into it too much. But, again, this is 7 games in. He's only started 7 games in his career. He's 22 years old. I think the best thing that we can do as people who cover this team and also just people who follow this team is take a deep breath and let's see where he's at the end of the season. He's so young and he's been thrown in. You hate to see the decisions he made, like the one in the end zone against the Bears, and he's missed a lot of throws. Williams was doing the same thing on the other side. These guys are just dripping in talent, but they can't make these high school throws. That's concerning. But at least in the back of my mind, it feels like Richardson's mistakes are correctable. I feel like he's reading the field pretty well most of the time. But tell me if you guys disagree.
Well, it's an interesting point and a fair point that you bring up in regards to this whole battle of patience and battle of wills. And I don't fully disagree with you that the mistakes that are there, whether it's mechanics, whether it's throwing motion, whether it's footwork, all of them are things that with the right coaching, in theory, can be corrected, in theory, can be fixed. But you had mentioned this on Twitter after the game, after their win on Sunday against the Bears, Zach, which is highlighting the fact that he's 22, highlighting the fact that there's only a handful of starts under his belt, and you close the tweet with, this is going to take a bit. I fear that societally and organizationally, how long it might take for him is a similar path to what you've seen from other quarterbacks that were expected to be elite performers right away, that it took years or in some cases a second home to get to where a franchise could back them, like Geno Smith, like very too early, but Sam Darnold through 3 games. And I don't know that the roadmap for the Colts has the type of time that I think you, I, and other rational Colts fans might want them to spend on him.
You know, my buddy Joel Erickson of The Star nailed this a second ago. I think it was Sunday or Monday. Someone asked him about the same topic we're talking about, and he said, why don't people have patience? Because everybody wants everything right away in this league. And Chris Ballard said that over everyone wants instant coffee. Like, I just wrote about a guy who threw 28 freaking interceptions his rookie year. Peyton Manning threw 28, and he prays to God that someone breaks the record every single year. And I think, one, we're spoiled in this town because I've written a lot about the other guy who came in and was an absolute baller from day one, and that's not normal. And I wrote a lot about C.J. Stroud last year in Houston, and he's different, and Justin Herbert. But those are the anomalies. And I think the smart fans out there, and I think there's a lot of smart Colt fans, know that this is going to take time, and the real barometer doesn't matter until the end of the season. And I don't know if that means a playoff berth. And this guy might not be the guy. Again, to counter your point, why weren't you fixing these things in training camp, in the offseason? Like Richardson had most of an offseason to fix these things, and he is missing throws you cannot miss. So I hear that side of the argument as well. But this is what happens. If you're going to throw these guys in, this guy started 10 games in college or something, whatever the number is. He just hasn't played a lot of football. So, if this is the biggest mistake, I feel like these are correctable, but it's going to take time, and nobody wants to wait for anything these days, and that's how it goes. But I think Ballard has the right approach, and I still think Steichen is really, really good, not based on what we've seen so far because it's been a struggle offensively. But let's see where they're at in late November. Let's see where they're at in January. Let's see where they're at the end of the season. And I think you'll get a better picture of where Richardson is because overreacting week to week, I don't think that serves anybody any purpose. Although it's really fun to talk about because it's been some wild swings so far.
Gives this station 45 hours of content every day from Monday through Friday. Zach, final thing from me. Since you are literally in the national story business, if I simply said to you, whether it's team or individual, the most compelling story right now in the National Football League in your mind would be what?
I really think it's Sam Darnold right now. I know it's September, but what Belichick said on McAfee yesterday really jumped out. He said everybody knew Darnold could play except for the Jets.
Right.
And so I'm fascinated to figure this out. And Jimmy, you just mentioned this, guys need a second chance. They need a second offensive coordinator. They need something different. Look at what Baker's doing, Sunday notwithstanding in Tampa. That's fascinating to me. And this is something I'm digging into for a story and maybe even a project. Why does it not work out in some places and then work out later? Obviously, the player grows up. He gets more mature. He's got better weapons. I get all that. But there's something to the situation and infrastructure a player walks into that matters. And I want to find out some answers to that because it's really nuanced. And we're seeing it across the league. I mean, Darnold's not just been good. He's in the MVP conversation. I know how idiotic that is to say in September. And if, gun to the head, I'm going Josh Allen right now. It's September 25th or whatever. But I think that's fascinating, and I want to know why and how are these billion-dollar teams and companies and organizations failing these young quarterbacks in the ways they are. It's just interesting to me, and I'm going Darnold right now because the Vikings look really good. They don't look like a flash in the pan, but they got a good one coming up on Sunday against the Packers.
Look, I appreciate winning as much as the next guy, but it's especially at that position, the survivors that have been written off in multiple spots that have then been able to take advantage of the opportunity. We outlined it, whether it's Geno, whether it's Baker, whether it's Darnold. The stories have been fascinating. Will they keep it up? We'll see. Like you mentioned, only 3 games in, but so far it's been electric with all of those offenses. Last thing from me, Zach, it goes back to the Vikings, which goes back to the Texans, which in turn goes back locally here to the Indianapolis Colts. Houston getting pounded the way that they did against Minnesota. Look, I look at the AFC South, and I legitimately think it's now the Colts maybe if they suddenly turn things around. But other than that, it's what we thought it was to begin the year. Houston's division to lose. Is there vulnerability there? Or is this still Houston in the driver's seat, and that was just an absolute buzzsaw in Minnesota taking charge on Sunday?
No, I'm with you. It's Houston's to lose. I was around the Texans a little bit in camp, and they have a really good roster, and they got manhandled on Sunday in Minnesota. Let's not beat around the bush there. It's Houston's to lose, but I still think the Colts have a shot. And I know that's crazy. They haven't won the division since my first year on the beat, which was 10 years ago. But here's why. The Colts haven't come close to playing their best football. I still think they get there. Whatever that looks like, we're going to find out. But I still think Steichen's really good. The defense can't be nearly as bad as it was in weeks 1 and 2. Buckner will be back. I think Richardson will settle down at some point, and I think Downs is going to make a big difference in that. I think Downs makes all the difference for this offense. You've seen Pierce play well. So I think the Colts are going to get better. They tend to do this, and I know it's frustrating. I know it's frustrating for the fans out there to watch this team play like crap the first month of the season. Trust me, I've written a lot of stories about it. But the other thing is Jacksonville is a disgrace. I mean, they're a mess right now. Trevor Lawrence is missing high school throws like Anthony Richardson, and Trevor Lawrence is a Pro Bowler a couple of years ago. And they're not scheming things up, and they look terrible, and I just don't think they're going to be a factor in this. Now, they may win a couple games against the Texans or the Colts, but I don't think they have the staying power. And I think they're going to be the teams that's on the out, and it's going to be the Colts and the Texans. And if you think back to that Week 1 game, yeah, they gave some away, I mean, Richardson makes that throw to A.J. Mitchell in the end zone, and that's a touchdown, and the Colts win. Maybe you can play that game all you want, but that was right there. And did the Colts give up 155 yards to Joe Mixon again in Houston? Probably not. So I think the Colts have a chance. They're going to have to do this the hard way because they've made this bet for themselves. They seem to do it every year. But I think this is going to be fascinating. The Colts usually are a team that gets better throughout the season, and the quarterback certainly has to get better. You heard what he said on Sunday. The Texans are good, but they've got a much, much tougher schedule being the division champs from last year, and they're going to be in the national spotlight. The Colts aren't. That usually helps the number 2 team a little bit as we get into November and December.
He is Zack Keefer, national features writer for The Athletic. And again, that piece, the behind-the-scenes look at the Manning cast, the night with the Manning cast, voice memos, legendary cameos, help redefine NFL broadcast. You can find that on The Athletic. Zach, appreciate the time as always, and find your head above water for a little bit, but looking forward to that next feature piece.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
See you, buddy.
Again, that is Zack Keefer. You can follow him on Twitter at @ZKeefer for all the latest feature work around the National Football League. When we come back, we talked a little bit about trying to keep Colts fans at Lucas Oil Stadium. There's a risk for a terrible Tal invasion. Rick has an interesting perspective on the way those splits tend to go, be it at home or on the road for teams. Plus, one thing I need to see change that impacts one of our favorite teams in town. We'll talk about that when we return. It's Query & Company. Greg Regstraw's in for Jake Query. I'm Jimmy Cook on The Fan. couple sound bites from Colts head coach Shane Steichen that we'll get to during this segment, but I want to pay off a tease that I've made once or twice now throughout today's show. Jimmy Cook alongside Greg Rakestraw is in for Jake Query. He'll be back tomorrow. Eddie Garrison with us as well. Rick, this goes back to the overall conversation of patience that's needed, and maybe it's more so for me because when I see something, especially a format or a construct of sport that I think is easily fixable or could be easily fixed, I want it changed right now, when in reality, based on where the sport I'm about to reference is in the season, it's impossible because that's why you have CBAs and rules and discussions. You can't change things because a talk show host in Indianapolis is upset about it, but not just from the Fever standpoint. The best of three setup that the WNBA has in place, and I get why they have it, because where financially the league was a couple of years ago. We had Debbie Antonelli on of the Fever yesterday, the Fever broadcast crew in Bally Sports with Pat Bullen, who does an excellent job covering them all season long. But she mentioned that it was monopoly money they were working with before. Now it's actually real dollars that are influxed into the league, charter flights galore. Before then, when you're having to navigate through budgets and figuring out how teams going to get to point A to point B, I get having a best of three where the first two games are for the team that had a better regular season, and the underdog in that matchup has to earn the right to have a deciding game three at home. I likened it yesterday to back in the day in the NBA, way back in the day, before my time, you and Jake experienced it, and then older fans as well, of, oh, we have tape delay on these games for some reason? Oh, it's an East Coast, West Coast issue? Okay, let's do 2-3-2 format so we're not having to worry about going by train, half kidding in that regard.
It wasn't train. It was by commercial airline flight.
For those franchises.
I got to get on Northwest Airlines or Piedmont or Eastern or something like that.
They finally fixed that aspect of it, but it was only 10 years ago when they finally were like, this 2-3-2 format, we should probably change that. It's archaic and dated now. I view the same thing with the WNBA. I get why they had to do it then, but not only should I think it be a 1-1-1 format where everybody gets a fair slice of the pie, and this isn't just for Caitlin Clark, this is league-wide for their stars as they try to grow the sport, get it to a best of 5. Maybe a best of 7's too much, but that's what the NBA does. I sit down, if I'm a casual sports fan, watching hockey, watching baseball, watching the NBA, and where I fall in love with stories and get hooked for next season is getting to see extended playoff runs and a best of 3, a blink of an eye, and it's over.
Well, as I told you before the show, that's going to get changed next year because of what you just said that Debbie Antonelli said. Everybody's about to make more money. So it is. I asked a question during a break. I said it's September the 25th, right? And that it is, by the way. The year is 2024, correct?
That is correct.
We call it AD, as in the years before Jesus / the year 0 were BC, right? Mm-hmm. Well, in WNBA parlance, everything's going to be BC and AC, before Caitlin, after Clark, because it is such an earth-changing experience from a financial standpoint for everybody involved. You're talking about the best of 3 series. And what Jimmy is alluding to is the fact that back-to-back games in Connecticut, the quirk is if the Fever win tonight and extend their season, the Sun, the higher-seeded team, would have to play a clinching winner-take-all season deciding game on the road of the lower seeded team. That's what he's alluding to. I guarantee you that changes, and that goes to a best of 5 format next year. You got to remember, we're only a couple of years removed from the 8 seed played the 5 seed, 1 game. The 7th seed played the 6th seed, 1 game. That was the format in the not too distant past. Now, many of you may not remember it, because the Fever had not been in the playoffs since Obama was president. And a little bit has happened on the globe the last 8 years since the Fever were last in a playoff format.
And this isn't just a Caitlin Clark fight or issue for me. There's plenty of big names across the board in this sport. I think about Sabrina Ionescu. I think about Asia Wilson, even though they are, in all honesty, primed for a very deep run and potentially another title in their grasp. But I just think if you expand it to the point of 5 games, maybe that's the happy medium, you are getting the opportunity to see more, expand the game to both your casuals and your diehard fans, And I just think it's captivating television the more playoff games you have.
A couple of different directions to go with this. First of all, a visual reference for a non-visual medium, other than you fine folks that are watching on the YouTube stream and
Shout out to
social
the break
media
room
right now. So, again, radio, bear with me for 10 seconds. Online, here you go. Do I think the WNBA was doing this before Caitlin Clark got there? Absolutely. I'm making an upward trajectory with my hand. Do I think it now is doing this? In other words, it's elevating from 5,000 feet to 30,000 feet as it leaves the airport? Yes, because she has been an accelerant for everything involved. So now let's talk about the construct of when the WNBA footprint is. Originally designed as another way to fill arenas during the downtime of the NBA season. So as we would say in radio or television, the WNBA season does have a hard out, which is about the middle of October, which frankly we're going to go past because, in case you didn't know, again, referencing a calendar in this segment, it's apparently the date and time segment, it's October as of next Tuesday. That's when October starts. So the WNBA playoffs will go past the middle of October, but that's when the NBA season starts. Now that there's enough money in the WNBA for players to not have to play overseas, that's been a goal of the WNBA for a while. That is now going to be an economic reality going forward. My bet would be the WNBA season moves forward, that it will start, say, in mid to late April, that literally the players that are drafted from women's college basketball will go from Final Four to training camp to you are playing. And because you move that forward, that then gives you more time for more playoff dates and longer playoff series.
At the risk of sounding really dumb, and I hope this is a safe space with you two, because I get why you call it a hard out for the NBA season is there. The Pacers are going to command things. And not just the Pacers. League-wide, you're suddenly having to figure out scheduling conflicts and where things would go.
There's really three venues that are not NBA venues that get used on a regular basis, okay? The G League venue that gets used in D.C. where the Go-Go play.
Sure.
I think the Dream are similar in Atlanta. Obviously, the Mohegan Sun are independent. The Storm will be independent. And the Chicago Sky play at Wintrust now. Used to play at UIC, not the United Center. So maybe not as many venues as you would think.
But for those that have the conflict, why is it any different than splitting time like the Kings do with the Lakers and the Clippers? Why is it that big of a hurdle?
I don't know if it's that big of a hurdle. Like, in other words, like if you had to move some regular season games because of a playoff game, no big deal. But again, I think because in theory, thinking of the NBA, again, you'd have to schedule the playoffs around it.
Yeah.
But I think the idea from the NBA perspective, who does own the WNBA, for those of you that don't make that logical leap, again, in theory, if the WNBA is, and it's never been stronger than it is right now, but it gives you something that we talk about with the NFL, wanting to own the entire calendar.
Sure.
Well, in theory, the NBA and WNBA can schedule itself where it does, where there are literally 12 months of games and conversations.
And you're not competing with your own product.
And the chance to put butts in seats and charge per cheek for you to sit in those seats. So
Eddie,
yes, that's part of it.
Eddie, did you want to jump in on that? I know you leaned towards a couple times.
Greg addressed it with just moving the season up. The other part of it, too, that I wonder is, like, if you move it up, are you thinking about the NFL and going up against the NFL? Because the Fever's first game was on Sunday at 3:30, right in the middle.
And they drew well.
Yeah, I know they still did, but still, that I would assume that's something they have to consider, right?
If I am the WNBA and I know that I'm going up against the NFL and college football, I'm basically trying to schedule as many playoff games for Monday through Friday evenings as possible and trying to own that real estate. And maybe I'm not going against the 1 o'clock or the 4 o'clock NFL window. Maybe I'm going against the 7 o'clock NFL window, or I'm competing with one game and not competing with 8 games or 5 games.
Do you think we ever reach a point, and I would lean on you because you've worked in every avenue of the sports media landscape.
I will lean on you because you are old, because you've been around forever.
I've said that a couple of times. Yes. I have a habit of doing that whenever
I did celebrate my 30th high school reunion early this summer, Jimmy.
Congratulations. I saw some
Eddie
pictures
is yet to celebrate his 30th year on this planet.
That's right.
Let's keep it moving forward.
Will we ever get to a point where the WNBA has carved out its audience? Nobody is schedule proof from the gorilla of the NFL, but will we ever get to a point where they can look at any NFL window and say, yeah, we're not going to get as many eyeballs as we wanted, but the fan base and the following is there where it's marginally impacted by a scheduling conflict with the NFL or whatever, college football.
Yes, and no, which you want to play to the biggest room possible.
Yeah,
I
of
think
course.
to some degree, Jimmy, they're already there.
Yeah.
Okay. But you're trying to get as many of the casual fans. You're trying to get as many eyeballs and butts and seats as possible. So again, to some degree, they're already there, but they want to play to the biggest room they possibly can.
We had a couple of questions about Anthony Richardson to start the show. There'll be a lot of those this year. Shane Steichen might have had some answers for us. At least he tried to. We'll get to those when we come back. It's Query and Company. You're listening on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. So there were two questions that Greg Rakestraw and I asked in our Anthony Richardson conversation in that first segment in regards to the level of patience you have for him. How do you fix the inaccuracy? And also, as Greg brought up, where does the running volume get turned up for him in terms of opportunities and in terms of situations where I'm not saying they're coddling him right now, but you're turning him loose the way that he joked about in training camp, which is the Steph Curry line about not taking away the three-pointer from Steph Curry or not taking away the running ability for Anthony Richardson. So 2 quick sound bites, then we'll react to that before we step aside for our conversation with Scott Agnes. He's boots on the ground, set up for Connecticut Sun versus Indiana Fever, potentially deciding Game 2 tonight, unless the Fever are able to force Game 3 and get a game at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Let's start first with the aspect of Anthony Richardson, and maybe fundamentals are the biggest area for him to grow.
I think that individual time, we added some individual time a couple of weeks ago, just getting those things, not just for him, but for everybody. You know what I mean? Working on the fundamentals and the details, because you can't lose sight of that during a football season. I mean, that's what wins and loses you football games, and that's for everybody.
We'll break down both of these clips as we go back to back. Then the reason for why Anthony Richardson has not been running a ton so far.
Yeah, it just depends on the concepts that we have up, right? Zone read stuff. You got to read a defensive end. You got to read a linebacker, whatever it may be. You know what I mean? Instead of just called design runs sometimes.
You brought up the fact that it doesn't look like it's a play calling aspect as much as it could be game script and as much as it could be Anthony Richardson's decision making. Comfortability matters for both of those things. How do you get him more comfortable?
I think it is D, all of the above in terms of, again, is it called runs? Is it him, again, getting out in the flat and, hey, you can make a play with your feet and still not take a shot, or you could take the lesser degree 20-yard pass down the field. Hey, take the 5 or 6 yards and move the chains. That's okay. Now, to answer your question, the secret's in the dirt, man. And again, you young bucks wouldn't know who that quote is relating to, and frankly, he was far older than me. It's Ben Hogan asked about how do you have the perfect golf swing.
Sure.
Yeah, kept hitting golf balls. There is nothing that you can do, and again, we probably did not give enough time to this. I'm talking about Anthony Richardson during the course of the offseason, but we have seen it now over the course of the last 3 weeks. You have to have game reps. He will get more comfortable as the game mileage continues to build up on those tires. But to Shane's point, again, I think there has to be more of a focus on fundamentals, probably than you would have given a lot of other NFL quarterbacks, just because you have seen. Like, I'm not Steve Clarkson, I'm not Tom House, I'm not Jordan Palmer. But if I can sit up there in the PA booth and go, gotta work on footwork, that's a problem. Okay, that means that's something you have to be working on. And again, just because of how young he is, where he is in terms of his level of experience, that fundamental work has got to continue for Anthony as he continues to literally learn on the job in game action.
Well, you bring up the Ben Hogan quote, and I see it in golf. You see it in what we do for a living in play-by-play or just communication. You see it in every walk of life. Repetition is the only way for growth.
Yep.
And that's why I kind of feel, not from you guys necessarily, but just in this lane on my own where maybe it looks ugly at times. And I'm not saying take the ball out of Jonathan Taylor's hands, but I want to see more pass attempts from him. Does he have to earn that through the fundamentals before they get there? Or can they just say, hey, let's chalk up another 15 pass attempts from you a game, so you're seeing those reps and learning from the success or failure that comes with it?
I am very big on putting him in a position to succeed. And I am very big on, yes, you want him to develop, you are still trying to win football games. And so if that means that to some degree you minimize the number of pass attempts that Anthony Richardson has for some time, I'm okay with that. So again, let's just, very small sample size. Colts won the football game on Sunday. He attempted 20 passes. Colts nearly won the football game against the Houston Texans. He attempted 19 passes. Colts looked abysmal in the game in between. They still had a chance to at least compete late, but Anthony Richardson threw the ball 34 times. So again, the two better team performances of the three so far, he threw the ball a combined 39 times. Now again, it goes back to a statement I made earlier. You also simply need to have more offensive plays, period.
Yeah.
You need to have more time of possession, but it is a balance. You want him to develop, But if that means almost a reduced game plan or putting more on the plate of Jonathan Taylor, I am perfectly fine with
I
that.
want to unpack more of that at the bottom of next hour, and I know it is a lane that I am totally alone on, and to a lot of Colts fans is something they don't want to hear, but maybe it might be best for Anthony Richardson's development. But first, it's a massive game for the Indiana Fever. Caitlin Clark, an opportunity to add another chapter to her incredibly young legacy when they take on the Connecticut Sun in Connecticut to try to force a decisive Game 3 at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Scott Agnes is there in Connecticut. He'll give us all the details leading into tonight's Game 2. We come back on Query & Company. You're listening on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. For the Indiana Fever, Game 2 tonight at Mohegan Sun as they take on the Connecticut Sun. We'll get to a man who is there in person, Scott Agnes, in just a second. Want to remind you while we have a second, come out and join 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan for the pop-up Pickleball Social presented by Franciscan Health. Swing by Craig Park in Greenwood this Saturday, September 28th from 9 to 4 for a day of fun featuring a pickleball clinic, celebrity matches, food trucks, raffle prizes, and so much more. J&B will be out there. Jake Query will be out there. They'll try to show off their skills or maybe lack thereof, depending on if you've watched either of them play pickleball. Have to go check it out for yourself. Go to 1075thefan.com. Click on the events tab for more information. It's all free and open to the public. Don't miss it. Again, swing by Craig Park in Greenwood this Saturday, September 28th, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. for the Fan Pop-Up Pickleball Social presented by Franciscan Health. On the court, but in this case, the basketball court, away from the pickleball court for a second, we go to Scott Agnes. He is the Pacers and Fever beat writer for Fieldhouse Files. As we mentioned, boots on the ground for a must-win Game 2 for the Indiana Fever. Scott, before we look at the storylines of the game itself, what went wrong for the Fever in Game 1, the biggest nugget for the WNBA has been the Caitlin Clark train, as attendance has been through the roof for Caitlin Clark in Fever games, and there's been a staggering disparity from attendance, especially around the league, regular season numbers, of viewership and attendance for Fever games where Caitlin Clark is there and teams that are not featuring Caitlin Clark in the Indiana Fever. Growth all around in the sport, but it's staggering the difference between those two numbers. It was no different for games that took place on Sunday, Game 1s around the WNBA. No surprise, it's Caitlin Clark and the Fever leading the way with over 1 million viewers for that contest.
Yeah, we figured all along that the Fever would be featured, right, Jimmy, in that ABC window as they counter-programmed to NFL on Sunday. But we were all curious to see what kind of number it would get going against the NFL, which, I mean, last year alone drew 93 of the top 100 programs on TV in the U.S. So not only did it do well, it did record-setting. And if you combine, Jimmy, the other 3 games, now they were on ESPN, but combine all 3 of those, and you still don't get the beast that is Caitlin and the Fever in a blowout win, by the way. And so one thing to keep in mind going into tonight, I think from a health of the league standpoint and how you may help it grow, what kind of drop-off is there whenever this Fever season ends?
That is a very fair question to have, and hopefully we don't have to have that discussion after tonight or after this week or anything like that. But allow me to point out the reality. The Fever have played at the Mohegan Sun 3 times this year. They have lost by 21, 17, and 24 points, and they have given up a minimum of 89 points in the 3 games they have played there. What can be different this time around, Scott?
Yeah, those are all key numbers, and one that they've been talking about all season defensively is if they can keep their opponent to 84 points or less, they basically win. So that's something to keep in mind as fans are watching tonight's game. And I think the first adjustment rate, it all is internal. That's the big thing they've been stressing is they had an intense film session here at Mohegan Sun Arena yesterday. And you know, like stats, the film doesn't lie. And it was a nice reality check for the team. And now it's about holding each other accountable and stepping up to the plate because defensively there was lulls. They were lackadaisical. I think that disruption to start the first quarter, and there were several different things from a bad foul to a technical to shot clock issues. I think that's where you saw the inexperience of this team shine through, and they did not respond well from that. So none of us can expect, right, Caitlin Clark to go 2 of 13 again, or for the Fever as a group to get outshot from the line and get just 6-3. Stephanie White, who we're all familiar with, went into the game saying, hey, we want to keep them to 10 or less from three-point line, and they easily did that. So you need to see the fight back, too, from this Fever team because all along this is probably the best defensive team in the WNBA, and more to that, the most physical. And that's difficult for a young team.
Scott, you mentioned the struggles from Caitlin Clark in this ball game. 2 of 13 from beyond the arc, 4 of 17 in total from the field. Numbers that you're not used to seeing from her. She's held to under 10 assists. It felt like at times they could never get in the flow they wanted to offensively. And you highlight the defensive prowess of Connecticut. From adjustment standpoint, how much of that was just how talented Connecticut is defensively and how much of it was simply an off night for the otherworldly star we've grown accustomed to being defense-proof at times in the second half of the season.
Yeah, Jimmy, I think most of it was just the shots not going down. Like, Caitlin looked back again at the film and was like, look, I liked all the shots for the most part. I got open, got the sidestep, used the screens, and they just weren't going down. That's why I was watching her closely this morning at shoot-around, and she was seeing them go through. But it's a little bit different when the arena's full and defenses are jumping at you. Obviously, we saw the Connecticut Sun make a significant change in that game one, putting DeWanna Bonner, who's a rare 90s baby, or excuse me, 80s baby in the league, right? I mean, Caitlin wasn't even born for Y2K, and DeWanna Bonner's 37 and still playing strong at both ends of the floor. I'll be curious how much of that continues. I fully expect for it to do so, along with Janae Carrington getting time on her. But so much of what this team has made them special is their pace and what they do in transition. And you can't get into any of that if you don't get stopped. So that's more so where it begins. And then from there, like you said, no flow, no rhythm. The pace and getting out in transition and getting those layups, I think then leads to more seamless offensive production.
If the season ends tonight, this season has been an unquestioned, unmitigated success by like 1,000,000%, correct?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the fact, just like the Pacers, and again, it's amazing how much has mirrored what the Pacers have done. The focus this year was experience together, seeing what Caitlin Clark could produce individually and from a team-wise and help build everybody up, because that's one of her best attributes, in my opinion, that doesn't get enough attention. Yes, she can shoot. Yes, it's her passing, but how she makes teammates better. And I think that's one of the best and top attributes in elite stars. And so getting back to the playoffs was number one, and they easily did that. They did so with 7 games left in the regular season. They've rallied a fan base and reignited, really. I mean, there was maybe 3,000 fans coming to the arena. Now they're sellouts, and it's $100 and merchandise flying off the shelves. You got Kelly Kroskoff, the big news this week, coming back into the fold, and that is a significant piece. She is the architect of this franchise, so that gives you reason for optimism. The interesting thing in all this, Rake, too, we're all thinking it, but several of them said it yesterday. Hey, we're having fun. This is joyful. We're not ready for this to end. So now we'll have to see if they play like it.
All right, so let me jump in again. My hope is you're covering a game Friday night. And my hope after that is you're covering a game, several of them next week. But whenever it ends, how will the Fever in 2025 look different than the Fever in 2024?
Yeah, I think one thing I'm most interested in is what free agent or two say, hey, that is fun. I want to go play there. I want the national attention. I want some brand deals. I mostly want to play meaningful basketball with Caitlin Clark. And so that's something to keep an eye on. The number one priority becomes re-signing Kelsey Mitchell. I'm guessing Melissa Smith is likely gone. You probably try to make sure Temi Fagbenle. But again, like the Pacers, I mostly foresee much of the roster coming back with just a couple tweaks to this group and then see how it continues on going forward.
Scott Agnes is our guest. He covers the Pacers and the Fever for Fieldhouse Files. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Scott, every now and again, we like to be reckless. We like to be conspiratorial. I want to put on the tinfoil hat here for just a second, run something by you. The tinfoil hat nationally for this game 2 is that by no circumstances whatsoever can the WNBA allow their star product in Caitlin Clark to bow out after 2 games.
Can I jump in here before Scott even answers?
Ahead. Yes, please.
Caitlin wasn't on the Olympic team. That kind of answers the question right there, doesn't it?
Valid. Yep, and I'm still months later trying to figure that one out, Ray.
Scott, the question on that front is, and I'm being flippant, that's the point of the tinfoil hat, but do you anticipate any friendly whistles going the Fever's way tonight? And on a more serious note, how much head scratching and how much turnover, as Rake and I discussed earlier, do you expect with this playoff format when WNBA executives are sitting with their hands in their faces by the end of season thinking, man, we needed to have more of our superstars, not just Caitlin, across the board in more extended playoff formats. And we've talked about it ad nauseum. Charter flights open it up. new league money opens it up. The Caitlin Clark effect opens it up. But 3 games is just too few.
Yeah, so here a lot here. First of all, I don't expect any kind of favorable whistles or like, oh, that was advantageous. However, what I am curious is how the game is called, because it could be officiated entirely differently. For example, we talked about the physicality of the Sun. Maybe that's allowed less, and so your team gets to the free throw line more. But I mean, neither team shot more than 15 free throws. Caitlin shot 2. What happens if they start calling it a little more tough, or there's a technical or a flagrant? They didn't even review that Carrington foul or no call earlier in the game. Maybe that becomes a flagrant 1, and then how does the Connecticut Sun respond? So, I was joking here. If the late David Stern was still running the NBA,
exactly,
it'd be fun to consider the options. But the big thing, and both coaches are stressing this, and it's true for the entire league, is all they want is consistent. But it changes from crew to crew how a game is called. So as long as it's called consistently tonight. Now, in terms of the off season, you'll have another year under the current collective bargaining agreement, and then you're going to tear that one up and have to figure a lot of things out, starting with rookie salaries, going from the totality of everyone's salary. Do you consider more roster spots? Probably not, because of the influx of a couple more teams, including one in the Bay Area next year. But as it relates to the playoffs, I think you try to push to best of 5, first of all, in the first round. I hate best of 7 in the first round.
Right.
But that's more TV windows. That's more TV revenue. And, it would be entirely disappointing for Fever fans and the WNBA as a whole. And it's not good for the monetary benefit, obviously, if Caitlin and the Fever are done tonight. But you hope she continues to help elevate the league. But there's so many things that were done for a specific reason, and now you can kind of throw it out, including this best of 3. That means you are not guaranteed a home game. The Fever could lose tonight without having a home playoff game, and I think everybody understands in a professional league like it is truly now, you cannot have that.
I'm still trying to go back to David Stern, and God rest his soul, to think of the old David Stern bias being favor of the team from Indiana is something that I'm still trying to wrap my head around as we're having this conversation. By the way, the Pacers training camp is about to start. The golf outing is today. What are the dates of importance coming up for the Blue and Gold?
Yeah, so yesterday you had a front office reception, something they've done for the last couple of years. Obviously, I was unable to be there out here in Connecticut, but Chad Buchanan speaking with local reporters that were able to be there. And the main thing here coming up is Monday. That's media day, followed by the start of training camp on Tuesday. They have a couple weeks of that before you get into the preseason. And much like they've done under Rick Carlisle since he came here, I love the preseason schedule. They go on the road for 2 games, then they come back home for 2 games, and then they have a week before the start of the regular season, which gets started on the road this time, and not against the Wizards for the 3rd straight year. It'll be on the road against the Detroit Pistons. But this is a group that's seemingly healthy, and the most encouraging thing to me, Rake, in all this is what they've done individually as the players. And for the 2nd straight year recently, they went away and had a little mini camp. Last year was Nashville. This year it was down to Orlando for a mini camp led by Pascal Siakam and others. So you got to love that, as they basically are running it back for a new year with a whole fresh set of expectations as well.
Scott, if the fan zone Kevin Bowen didn't exist, I would be the biggest advocate for Benedict Mathurin. I, like many, fell in love with him during his time at Arizona, and I want to see him succeed, not just because, I like seeing Pacers grown talent do well, but I think for them, big picture, their championship window, at least this first one of the Tyrese Halliburton era, is solely dependent on him taking the leap forward that they need him to. A conversation that we've had countless times on this program has been the ego of players, and I can never put myself fully in those shoes other than to be human, but the expectation that comes with trying to be a franchise guy and the money that comes with it and all of that, none of us can fully relate to that. But I have a hard time believing that for Benedict Mathurin, where his psyche's at, where his development's at some point in time this season, he should be able to work his way into a mainstay in the starting lineup. This has been covered a couple different angles. You've wrote about it on Twitter. Dustin Dupirak for the Star has covered it, being there at the media days the last couple of days, which I know, as you mentioned, you've been unable to attend because you're out covering the Fever. How close is Mather in your mind to taking that leap forward, especially on the defensive end? And am I reading too much into the idea that if we're at game 62 this season and in his third year, he's still not a starter for this team, that is sign of tough things to come?
Yeah, I disagree with that last statement. Just because it depends on the makeup and what this team looks like. Like, are you going to remove Andrew Nembhard from the starting lineup after all he has done? Aaron Neesmith's probably been your second best defender. Who you taking out? That becomes the most difficult thing. If anything, I'm very curious, in fact, what he looks like as your sixth man, because you come in and he could provide a little pop of energy off the bench and a boost of scoring. And so maybe that will become his role. I think it'll all play out here coming up in training camp, because Rick Carlisle is one that's never going to just crown and give you the position right away. He stressed during training camp last year, every position is an earn it. You got to earn it. Nothing's given here. But to your larger point, I completely agree. I think they're on the verge of being a contender, but they need something big to happen. They need some guy internally to pop, and that most likely candidate obviously is Mather. Maybe it's Nembhard, the way he's tracking. Or you go out and make a move where it's a 3-for-1 and go get something more significant. But the more realistic thing, Jimmy, is that it's internal, given the team's now current cap restraints. They're basically up against the luxury tax. I think in a perfect world, they don't pay it this year. And then next year you have to be willing to, when you're talking about, re-signing Miles Turner or remaking your roster just a little bit as you become a contender there. You have to be wise about how you handle that. But you're right, a lot hinges on Matherin. And while you don't want for him to obviously miss that valuable time in the spring this past year, I think a lot could be learned and gathered from that time on the bench, seeing what it takes in the film sessions, and provide kind of a motivating, humbling factor about giving him the urge and the push that he needs, even though he is such a self-motivated guy, to come out and elevate his game coming off this injury that he did have.
Scotty, last thing for me, you don't have to write much about contracts and free agency the next few years, with one notable exception. After 18 months of not having much Miles Turner contract conversation, that kind of is the conversation in terms of what the pieces will look like going forward after this year. How big of a deal is this going to be during the course of this year?
Yeah, I think it'll be significant just because you don't have the obvious next in line. Isaiah Jackson, along the same lines of Matherin, has a lot to prove this year. Because keep in mind, the one piece that's notable that you did lose was Jalen Smith, and they moved off of Daniel Tice, and Goga Batadze is no longer with the organization. There was such a backup at that center spot for so long, but it no longer exists, and they'll obviously have to decide on Isaiah's fourth-year team option coming up, or his next contract rather coming up potentially before the start of the season, but they don't have complete assurance at that 5 spot. And so it's going to be costly, because if you're Miles, you're looking around and you're seeing what Isaiah Hartenstein forgot in the mid-20s, and you're really thinking and getting excited about not only could you potentially finish your career here, but this will probably be Miles's last big payday, even though the money's going up. And I don't see any reason why it won't work out, but that will become the conversation. It's nothing now. It's nothing the Pacers can do. It's nothing Miles can do. It's a discussion and a talking point, though, that is the top of mind going into next July.
Scott, closing with the Fever, what is the main thing that needs to be done tonight, or main change that needs to occur with all the body of work they have against Connecticut, as Greg outlined, at Mohegan Sun, where they've struggled this year? What's the one thing that needs to occur for the Fever to get a home game, a deciding Game 3 at Gainbridge?
Yeah, the obvious one is Caitlin Clark needs to get going and score 25 points. But I'll take you a different direction, because that's the obvious. And I think it's they need to win the transition battle, because what that also means is you're stringing together stops. And what frustrated me, Jimmy, so much about that first game is a couple times, in a row, they would allow back-to-back layups in transition. And that, if you're a head coach, you're just furious about, because you have assignments. You got to communicate. You can't get caught up in the moment. So to me, if they handle themselves and win the transition battle and fast break points, that's a sign of good things.
He is Scott Agnes. Again, you can find all of his work on Fieldhouse Files, and he will be out there right now covering Game 2 of the Sun against the Fever as Indiana tries to force a deciding Game 3 back at their place. Scott, thanks for the time. As always, enjoy the game tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks, boys.
And you can follow him on Twitter at Scott Agnes. All right, Rick, you brought it up, but it has been fascinating for the Fever this year, not just from on the court performance, but the way that they have, and maybe we should have expected it, but some didn't. Some thought it would be slower than it has been. Caitlin Clark has not just been a ratings machine. She's backed it up with her performance on the court to the point that you look at articles now looking to 2025, they're a championship contender now. They just need to fine-tune a couple pieces on the roster.
Obviously, they have a big three. It is clear who that is. Now, how do you kind of arrange the pieces around? They are the two different types of players. You go, that's who you're looking at. Every three-point shooter in the league should look at the way that they play and look at who will find them the ball. And it's like, all I have to do is stay on the corner and somebody's going to find me. Yes, they will find you on a regular basis. And then two, whomever the current female equivalent of Bill Laimbeer is, go get that player on your team. And seemingly that was talked about a lot in May when they were struggling and she was getting bumped and elbowed off of every screen. I think that's come down a little bit. And to be blunt, she's getting a little more of a superstar whistle, I think, going forward on things like that. But give me shooters, give me an enforcer, and this team will be really stinking good a year. They're pretty good now. They will be outstanding a year from now.
Well, and you mentioned the whistles getting cleaned up a little bit. Obviously, I have tongue-in-cheek there, but that's where the tinfoil hat comes into play. Maybe it's officiated a different game tonight in Game 2.
And let me say this, okay, we're all nouveau riche here, all right?
Sure.
I'm sure there's a couple of diehards that are sitting here listening around going, I've followed WNBA for – good for you, okay? I haven't.
Sure.
As somebody's been around I haven't had the need to for the last 7 or 8 years, all right? But now that will suddenly become a thing in terms of if this state and in this area will be, all right, who's the players coming here to play off of? Clark, Boston, and Mitchell. Clearly that is your group going forward, and then what other pieces are you moving around? And I'm sure some other role players will be back. I'm not saying they're going to clean the decks. I'm sure Lexi Hull will be back and others, but now how do those pieces fit going forward? That will be the curiosity of the offseason of the Fever, whether it starts at about 9:30 this evening or hopefully a couple of weeks from now.
The Pacers question I asked him about Benedict Mathurin, and perhaps I'm somewhat jaded in this regard because I've seen that sport and I've seen it with teams in markets like Indiana where it feels like you have to be perfect in nearly every avenue of your front office. And even then, sometimes it's not enough to be able to compete with the very top of the sport. And yes, you've seen some parity shift the last couple of years, but all of it goes towards being successful in the draft, and you're still seeing big markets win titles, the Warriors, the Celtics this past year. You need to be perfect in these smaller markets. For me, with Benedict Mathurin, I believe in him still. I think he can be a cornerstone piece of this franchise, but I worry if it doesn't pan out and if they decide, not to go with an extension with him, or they decide to try to trade him and move on from him. I don't want to fully count out what Kevin Pritchard and Chad Buchanan have been able to do. They've done more with less. I'd be a fool to do that. But I worry to reach the heights they want to reach. They have to be right on Mathurin. And how quickly is he able to answer the call defensively? Because Scott brought it up. I'm willing to hear that argument of Nesmith or Nembhard are better for them defensively. But from a scoring output standpoint, you're undoubtedly getting more firepower from Mathurin than you are them.
I'm okay with Mathurin being your sixth man. It's always been more about who finishes the game rather than who starts it. And so if that means that he can have more of an offensive focus and you can hand him the ball and say, go get him when he comes in 6 minutes, 8 minutes in the game, whatever the case may be, and if he carries more of the offensive load than, say, your starting five. In other words, if he is the guy that gets more shots up because he's playing opposite Halliburton and Siakam, great, go get it. I like the five of Turner, Siakam, Nesmith, Nembhard, Halliburton. I'm cool with that. If Mathurin is your star sixth man and is a candidate for sixth man of the year in the league, to me, that should be his goal. I like that starting five. I like Nembhard, and then I like Mathurin as your six, and then you can and bring Toppin off the bench. And again, you fellas, go get it. Attack. Play like your hair's on fire. I'm good with that. And then if you earn minutes in the rotation the last 6 minutes because of how well you're playing, because you're too good to take off the floor, no problem with that whatsoever.
There's an element of Anthony Richardson and his development as a quarterback that I feel like maybe we've lost the plot on. Or perhaps I'm just crazy. We'll discuss that when we come back. It's Query & Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. So I'm about to share something that I've mentioned to Jake in the past, and it's an outlook on the Colts season that admittedly is going to frustrate Colts fans, and it's understandable I would have this viewpoint because I don't actively root for the Colts. I cover the Colts. I want them to do well because the city does well, but I myself am not a Colts fan.
Will it frustrate the member of the Colts radio network you're conversing with right now?
Probably. You might give me a pat on the head and be like, "Hey, Jimmy, what are you doing here?" But I don't think to the point
if
that
I
you
can
leave.
tolerate Jacob's phone call on Sunday, we're going to be fine. So
yeah,
go
no,
ahead.
I'm not running anybody out of town by any means.
Will it force me to turn your mic off?
I don't think so. I don't think it's quite that level, but I'll leave that up to you as the one calling the shots behind the ones and twos for us. That's the voice of Eddie Garrison.
In inside baseball news here, if the technical staff could give me on this side of the table, not for this segment, but for future Colts post-game shows, the way we had in our old studio, I actually had access to the call screener in terms of the actual phone, where it was me who would drop calls and not the producer. Fellas, if I could get that for future Colts road games, the next one's going to be next Sunday the 6th, that'd be great.
You missed the power of judge, jury, and executioner?
I wouldn't go that far. I think it's for the sanity of both the host and the show, really. I think it's what it's for, yes. But I derailed your momentum.
No, that's
Please
okay.
continue.
I do not care about wins and losses this season for this team. I just don't. It'd be great if they make the playoffs. It would be great for them to finally win a division title. My job is not on the line for them winning and losing. I'm not in that front office. I'm not the head coach. I'm sure Steichen and Ballard both want to have their cake and eat it too, which is develop Anthony Richardson and be winning games as effectively as possible. When I look at what happened on Sunday and where the best area for this team to win would be, it would be handing the ball off to Jonathan Taylor ad nauseum, let him pick apart defenses and bring along Anthony Richardson slowly. In that world, it is Anthony Richardson that is complementing Jonathan Taylor's game. I think we need to get to a point where Jonathan Taylor's game is what's complementing Anthony Richardson. And for me, and Rick, you brought this up earlier, you're right. There was a point against Chicago where this is a winnable game. Let's go. Hand the ball off to JT, pound the rock, run the damn ball as it were, go get a W and continue to bring Anthony Richardson along. My fear is this. What happens if that's the outlook that they go with, where he's having 20 pass attempts a game, for the sake of argument, 20, 25 pass attempts per game? The fundamentals, as Shane Steichen says, still aren't there. He's only completing about 50% of those passes. But hey, they won 7 games this year because they handed the ball off to Jonathan Taylor, and we get to 2025, and you're in the same boat with just as many questions as answers for Anthony Richardson.
You know what happens, you assume, right? I don't have to spell that out. You can do that in your car
Yeah.
Or watching there.
Yeah.
Okay. My assumption is if he is the quarterback going forward, not in 2024, but in 2025, 2026, et cetera, that completion percentage is going to go up. All right? If the completion percentage conversation we are having after week number 3 is had in week 14 and week 15 and week 16 and week 17, we're having a different conversation about this. The assumption is that is going to get better, that the light will turn on at some point in time. And I don't have his completion percentage numbers from last year. So Jimmy or Eddie, if you could look that up for me, because I thought it was closer to 60%.
It was 59.5.
So I was off by half a percentage point. It was better a year ago.
Now, we are going off of, in fairness with that, 4 games. It's a relatively small sample size, but it was better a year ago.
Right.
Yes.
In other words, it's better, and it's a 3-game sample size now.
Correct.
So, again, I actually think there's been regression since that time. And as you made the point earlier, this is with Jonathan Taylor. This is with, in theory, and we tend to think this is the case, a deeper wide receiver room. You have Josh Downs back. You have Michael Pittman back. You, frankly, have seemingly a better Alec Pierce than you had at this time last year. You also have Ashton Doolin back. A.D. Mitchell has not played well so far, but again, let's, to some degree, give him kind of the same grace conversation we're giving about Anthony Richardson as we're going to give to Adonai Mitchell. So I think the experience of playing, even if doing so with a reduced playbook and a reduced ask in terms of what he's going to be needed to do for this team to be successful, I think he can learn a lot in winning, even if that means it's 20 passing attempts a game versus 30 passing attempts a game. I'm okay with that.
They need help. They need Anthony Richardson to have help around him. Like, those guys need to step up. They have had drop after drop every week. I counted 4 passes last week that should have been catches, and that's 4 of his 10 incompletions. And then you have the 2 picks. So there's 4 missed throws right there. So the stats are a little bit misleading on the 10 for 20 because you have Josh Downs with the drop. I couldn't remember. I know there were 2 other drops because I was keeping track of them. I can't remember who had them. And then to me, the ball to A.D. Mitchell and his only target down the field, he let the defender come and break that up because A.D. didn't go back to get the football.
Well, Anthony also just tried to touch that ball instead of just absolutely throwing a rope.
I agree with you there, too.
That's been the statement that Kevin Bowen has used. He didn't throw his fastball. Listen, both things can be true, okay? Have there been balls dropped by receivers? Absolutely. But have there been misses that have been jaw-dropping misses? Yes. Both those things can be, true.
And I don't want this to come fully from an area of ignorance, but Eddie, to your point, I'm not worried about the playmakers around him figuring it out. I'm more worried about him figuring it out and being able to master the fundamentals and going away from the point where, yes, you watch an Anthony Richardson highlight package, and boy, that was a 60-yard bomb, but it's followed up by 3 and out here, 3 and out there.
Right.
And Rake, you pointed it out earlier, a lot of that does come from a Jonathan Taylor handoff on 1st and 10, and he's able to pick up 6 yards per carry or whatever, and it sets up 2nd and short or 3rd and manageable to a point where it makes life easier on a quarterback. If we get to a point, though, where they're handing the ball off to Jonathan Taylor constantly because they feel like that's the best path to win, my fear is, okay, that's great. Anthony Richardson knows how to hand off a football. We know what Jonathan Taylor can do. I would rather see full baptism by fire and have him being a volume shooter in terms of the passing game.
I think you only shortchange Anthony Richardson by not playing him. He simply needs to get game experience.
That's it. That's all it is at this point.
Now, again, this is they're not running the wing T. Okay, Anthony's not going to have a great game. He was 3 of 5 for 178 yards and 2 touchdowns. No, we're not playing service academy football here.
Sure,
we're talking about more of a run-dominated offense. Doesn't mean they're going to forego the passing game completely.
I look at Pittsburgh defensively this week. Greg Rakestraw to my right, in for Jay Query, Eddie Garrison with us as well. I'm Jimmy Cook. It's Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. I look at what Pittsburgh can do defensively, especially with TJ Watt being the game record that he is. And while, yes, I am sitting here pounding the table asking for more pass attempts for Anthony Richardson, for the playbook to be opened up, yes, to Eddie's point, for their playmakers to help him out non-Jonathan Taylor division. But I look at Pittsburgh and I think to myself, not just winning or losing the game, which I've stressed isn't my main factor here. From his development, I don't know that defense offers up the best opportunity to say, hey, go throw it 40 times against the Steelers.
Victories are a first down at a time. And to me, the most important stat, other than, the final score on Sunday, but if you want to tell me an indication of the Colts' success, turnovers. If this team wins the turnover battle, they are a lot closer to winning that football game. That is the case every Sunday, but especially this one. Again, you can bore me to death offensively in this game. That's fine. But again, because of the great defense and average offense in which you are playing, a punt is not the worst thing in the world.
You brought up the Colts schedule a little bit earlier today, and when we were doing everybody's favorite exercise, I put air quotes around that because I'm the only one that likes this exercise, but when we're doing in the off season, in the dog days of summer,
we all do it,
simulating your win-loss tally, for me,
I want to defend myself that I was doing this only in terms of the next month, in terms of, hey, the Colts aren't playing the hottest quarterbacks in the league until they get to C.J. Stroud the next time around.
But going into the season, maybe remove Pittsburgh from the list, but 2 of those 4 matchups, you thought to yourself, oh, that could be a tough quarterback test for the Colts defensively. Trevor Lawrence looks like dog water. There's no Tua Tagovailoa anymore, and Miami can't find itself offensively. Well, Levis still exists, so maybe that's it.
And at the same time, Minnesota game didn't look so tough. They're going to go with Jay. He got hurt. Again, do this at your own risk, because we do this in the vacuum of this team will be the same as they were last year. And this team, we're thinking about them in terms of their full roster and not in terms of injuries. And that snapshot changes literally every play in the National Football League.
I bring up the Colts schedule and predicting wins and losses, though, because if you were looking for an outlook for them to make the playoffs, and I do get it, to some extent, fair or not, there is an expectation for Chris Ballard to finally have deliverables for success with this team, especially getting back to the postseason. Maybe contending for a division title. Rake, for me, it was stacking wins at the back end of the schedule. Now, all of a sudden, you look around at the front end, before you get to Houston, these look like winnable games when you're comparing the tail of the tape for quarterbacks versus the Colts defense.
Can I throw in a Robert's Rules of Order here?
Of course.
Can we not have the playoff conversation when the team is under 500?
That's fine.
Can we make them at least get back to 2-2, and then we can reintroduce the playoff conversation next week?
I guess I'll modify it because I don't want to have the playoff conversation necessarily.
I know what you mean.
As much as I do that. This is a window now of opportunity because of the injuries or struggles that have befallen these other offenses on the schedule.
There is a window over Terre Haute, although it's going to be filled with rain seemingly for the next several days.
We're going to step aside. When we come back, we'll have the Jay Cook plays of the day. Perhaps we'll get a play from Eddie fresh off his birthday weekend. We'll make the handoff to John as well. Greg Rakestraw's with me in for Jake Query. I'm Jimmy Cook. It is Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Today's plays of the day. Today's plays of the day brought to you by the fine folks at Greenfield Signs and Lighting. Greenfield Signs, a professional, comprehensive sign company with 2 locations in central Indiana. They'll take your signage ideas and take hold of that project from design all the way to delivery. Family-owned and managed business for more than 4 generations. You don't often get a second chance to make a first impression. Make the most out of your first opportunity with Greenfield Signs and Lighting. For more information, go to greenfieldsigns.com. We haven't had one of the dual .coms in a couple weeks between my paternity leave and Eddie Garrison's birthday leave. But we'll dive right in with baseball bets for today's Wednesday, September the 25th, as the playoff push continues. We'll take the Cleveland Guardians to win the money line over the Cincinnati Reds. We'll also take the Milwaukee Brewers to win the money line over the Pittsburgh Pirates. Nestor Cortez is scratched tonight for the New York Yankees, so give me a cute fella.
Hey, root for me.
The Baltimore Orioles to one on the money line over the New York Yankees. I'll take the Mets over the Braves outright as well. And last one for you, there were some videos of boos at Guaranteed Rate Field because White Sox fans, or at least baseball fans in general, wanted to witness history, wanted to witness the White Sox finally lose their 121st game. The Angels White Soxed them. I don't think that happens tonight. I'll take the Angels to win on the money line and the White Sox fan finally get their infamy. Eddie, any plays from you?
I will take the Texas Rangers to win tonight, so that means Texas Rangers, as Jimmy would say, on the money line.
There you go.
Against the Oakland Athletics. And then I will take over 7.5 in L.A. tonight between Dodgers and Padres. It is a good pitching match. However, I do think both of these offenses will be able to score a couple runs off the starters and then each get a run off the bullpen. So over 7.5 tonight.
One late play. Give me over 20.5 total points for Caitlin Clark as the Fever force a game 3.
Those
are
at you.
Your plays of the day. Can you handle that level of degeneracy around Rick?
I'm used to it at this point.
Okay.
We're good.
All right. Yeah, all the ads and everything else that's around society, it's just meshed into this stage.
You're good. All good there.
What's on the docket for you coming up? It's always good to have you back here in studio.
Thank
we know
you.
you can hear you all around 107.5 The Fan.
Little college volleyball tonight for ISC with Marion University. Big rivalry match against Indiana Wesleyan. I get a night off tomorrow, Friday night, apparently in the remnants of a hurricane. I get high school football with Ben Davis and Lawrence North. I get to head to the JMV Polytechnic Institute, known as Indiana State University. I will have their game along with Jim Leisure, of course, you hear on this radio station too, as he and I will do the ESPN Plus broadcast of Indiana State and Houston Christian coming up on Saturday afternoon. Indy 11 soccer Saturday night against the Miami FC. And then, of course, in red zone highlights and post-game analysis for Colts and Steelers coming up on Sunday afternoon.
I've not studied the forecast for Friday as intently as I should. I know you have, so I'll propose this kind of humorous anecdote before we get out of here. I won't say where it is, but where I'm broadcasting on Friday, Space is a premium. They offered me outside in the visitors section or in their adjacent building. Without looking at the weather, I chose the adjacent building for a number of different reasons. You'd say that's the smart choice.
So Jimmy's going to Brebeuf is the reference that he is making. And great people at Brebeuf.
I love the people at Brebeuf.
Not the most spacious press box ever.
And they have a building right there that's going to provide line of sight, but the other option was outside in the elements with the fans, to which I was like, I'll stay in the wellness center.
Listen, I've tailgated with the Roncalli fans, and I've told I had a great time when I did. But I would
not conducive to a good broadcast.
I would take the great indoors this time around.
All right. Well, that is Greg Regstrugan. You can find him all over the place at 107.5 The Fan, and of course his work with the Indy 11 and ISC Sports. Jake Query will be back with us tomorrow. It'll be a loaded show lineup for us. Doug Bowles will join us, Thor Nystrom, Matt Taylor, and Mike Greenberg. The fun's begin at noon and runs until 3. But you don't have to wait that long to have some more fun. The Ride with JMV is next. Keep it right here on The Fan.